enormous freight train is out of control, tearing through the Canadian Rockies. The crew does nothing to slow the train's terrifying speed.
Jack, are you there?
Charging the other way, a passenger train with more than 100 people on board.
Front end, Jack, come in.
Oh my God.
Mayday, mayday! We're doing 90 miles an hour! Out of control!
Take a life jacket!
Where's the Coast Guard?
Don't let go!
It's one of the most spectacular train rides in the world. Every year, thousands of people take the slow and easy way through Canada's Rocky Mountains. Avoiding traffic, they take the train and leave the driving to somebody else. In late winter, 1986, a gentle trip through the Rockies will end tragically.
It was like a mini atom bomb. And all of a sudden it ignited. Woof! I'm gonna help you.
I can hear the women screaming, you know, to save her baby.
An investigation makes shocking discoveries about the Canadian railroad industry.
At that time, I didn't think that anything was wrong.
February the 8th, 1986. Spectacular northern lights dance across the sky over Edson, Alberta in Western Canada. Driving freight trains has been a lifelong dream for 48-year-old Canadian National Railways engineer Jack Hudson. But after 16 years on the job, he knows all too well that it can be a grueling career. Because Canadian freight trains travel such vast distances, up to 12 local crews may be used in the course of one cross-country journey. Hudson works a mountainous stretch of track through Alberta, running between his hometown of Jasper and Edson to the east. Like many trainmen, Hudson works a regular beat, driving over the same stretch of track, then turning around again with another train, day after day. At around 11 p.m. last night, Hudson got off the freight train from Jasper and spent the night here in the company bunkhouse at Edson. Now he's up again after just 3.5 hours of sleep, ready to return to Jasper. At the station, he's joined by his brakeman. Like Hudson, 25-year-old Mark Edwards lives in Jasper. And like Hudson, he hasn't slept very much.
Did you get some rest?
Not much. Got a touch of the flu. Could use a full night's sleep.
Hudson and Edwards will ride up front in the first engine. Hudson drives the train, while Edwards keeps an eye on the brakes and pitches in if Hudson needs any help. Known to his fellow railmen as Smitty, 33-year-old Wayne Smith is Hudson's conductor. He's the last of the three-man crew in charge of the freight train this morning.
Smitty?
Smith rides in the caboose, the last car in the train. He acts as an extra set of eyes, making sure the men in the front end know what's going on behind them. The three men are long-time employees of Canadian National, or CN, Rail. And all of them have been up and down this length of track countless times before. The train they're riding today is enormous. CN train 413 is just under 2 kilometers long. The cars are filled with a collection of grain, metal pipes, and chemicals. It tips the scales at more than 11 million kilos. As the freighter rolls into Edson, it slows to a crawl, but doesn't stop. Getting it started again would take time, and the crew wants their trip to begin as soon as possible. Hudson and Edwards take the train on the fly, boarding it as it rolls slowly along. According to CN Rail's Code of Conduct, this is illegal, but it's something crews do routinely. With the caboose still nearly 2 kilometers away, Smith stands by the track to inspect the cargo as it crawls by. He makes sure there's nothing obviously wrong with the freight or the cars carrying it.
All set, Jack. Clear signal leaving Edson.
Clear signal leaving Edson.
Another part of Smith's job is to stay in touch with the front end of the train. He's supposed to make sure they're alert throughout the journey. Now, with the caboose pulling alongside the platform, Smith climbs aboard.
Okay, he's got the brakes off. You're good to go. See you later.
At 6:40 a.m., Hudson pushes the throttle. The freight train picks up speed as its 8,000 horsepower diesel engines open up. The CN freight train begins the long haul west to Jasper. The men are going home.
Dispatcher to 413.
Good morning, dispatcher.
Good morning, Jack.
But Hudson isn't sure exactly how long his train is, or precisely what he's carrying.
Dispatcher at Medicine Lodge here. I haven't had a chance yet.
Oh, that's, you got pretty well grain cars, eh?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. This should be the right length then. Okay, thanks.
As 413 roars west, a Via passenger train speeds east on the same track. Via Rail's supercontinental passenger train number 4 is cruising toward Edmonton, Alberta. More than 100 passengers are enjoying the spectacular scenery as it cruises through the rugged Canadian Rockies. 36-year-old Jamie Haight is a car assembly operator. He's headed home to Ontario after a 2-week visit to his family in Vancouver.
It's a very, very small community that you're in close proximity with a lot of people very, very suddenly. And so there's a lot of people we got to meet and got to interact with. I remember there was a couple of ladies that we met over dinner. One was very, very pregnant.
While some passengers are still sleeping, Haight goes into the day coach to do some reading before breakfast. It's the 4th car in the train.
I remember this lady, and she had a little boy with her, about 3 years old or whatever. He was quite in awe, the little child was quite in awe of the scenery. So I sat down in it, and I lifted the shade a little bit so I could get some of the daylight coming in, and I started to read a pocket novel.
Several cars behind Haight is 61-year-old assistant conductor Herbert Timpey. An old hand on the Canadian passenger line, he's been riding this piece of track for 7 years.
I had to be the assistant conductor and look after the passengers on that train.
Next stop, Hinton.
The passenger train is pulling into Hinton. The freight train is just about to reach Hargwin Station, 20 kilometers east. Here, the rail line briefly splits into 2, so trains can pass each other. 413 will take the upper track, while the passenger train passes below it. As Hudson approaches the split in the tracks, traffic signal lights tell him to slow down.
Smitty, we've got an approach limited signal at Hargwin. Next station, Dalehurst, over.
Head end to 413, approach limited at Hargwin. Next station, Dalehurst. Out.
These are the last words these men will ever exchange. A dispatcher in Edmonton sets a switch, and 413 is forced onto the upper track. The Via passenger train arrives at Hinton Station at 8:20 a.m. On board, 64-year-old Martin Pedersen settles down to breakfast in the downstairs lounge of the Dome car. He's feeling rested after a good night's sleep. A former World War II fighter pilot, Pedersen has a lot of experience with locomotives. Over the course of the war, he blew up 36 enemy trains in France. The night before, Pedersen swapped war stories with another veteran he met on board. 61-year-old Kenneth Cuttle is a former Royal Marine.
It was February. I was going to Edmonton to look for another job.
Like Pedersen, Cuttle also fought behind enemy lines in World War II. Cuttle and Pedersen are survivors.
Let's go upstairs to the Dome car, have a look around, see what's happening.
The train was pretty comfortable, you know, not many people on board. I said, let's go up to the Dome car because it was just coming light and we see lots of things which you might not get another chance to see. We were in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains.
There are now 115 people on board. But the train will never make it to Edmonton, and the passengers and crew enjoying the early morning trip will soon be fighting for their lives. It's a clear, sunny morning on board a passenger train in Western Canada. Breakfast is being served as the train rolls east through the Canadian Rockies. Just 15 kilometers away, an 11 million kilo freight train, CN 413, rumbles down the track towards it. With diesel engines still pounding at full throttle, it's pulling 113 rail cars of grain and hazardous material. From the outside, everything looks normal. But what's going on inside the lead engine of 413 is about to become one of the greatest mysteries in Canadian railroad history. Freight trains and passenger trains often travel on the same track. For short sections, the track splits, so trains heading in opposite directions can pass safely. Today, 413 is on the upper branch. Signals tell the freight train to slow, then stop completely. The signals will only turn green again once the passenger train has passed safely by below. Then the freight train can rejoin the main line. But 413 isn't slowing down. It's now heading downhill and it charges through the warning lights. If it doesn't stop soon, it will return to the main line at full speed, straight into the path of the passenger train. Unaware of the bizarre behavior of 413, the passenger train continues east. Martin Pedersen gets his breakfast.
Hi.
Up ahead, the freighter thunders through the last set of light signals, ignoring 3 red lights that command it to stop. It slams back onto the main line. It's traveling 95 kilometers an hour and weighs more than 11 million kilos. And still it doesn't slow down. Herbert Timpey sits to relax. Ken Cuttle has a clear view of the railway ahead.
I got in conversation with an English guy, and he had his back to the front, and I was looking over his shoulder forward the way the train was going. There was a flickering light in the distance. And not knowing the track layout, I thought, oh, there must be another line, and if it's another train, it's going to go past us, you know?
Just as I was reading the pocket novel, one of the girls from the party or group happened to just walk past me.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
And then, boom.
The trains collide like two charging rams at a combined speed of nearly 200 kilometers per hour. Passengers are rocked by one collision after another as 70 freight cars pile into the wreckage.
Like an incoming wave, grain cars, long pipes 3 foot in diameter, 30 feet in length, you name it. And these were flying through the air like toys.
Thrown from the tracks by the force of the collision, one freight car flies through the air, smashing to a stop on the Via train.
The whole world seemed to explode.
It was like a mini atom bomb. It was a big mushroom of black smoke.
Then, everything was dark. They could no longer breathe because everything was filled with smoke. Oh, I'm gonna die. And the third thing that happened was I just resigned myself to that.
I've been working about 37 years and on the railroad, and I never seen anything so bad.
The wave of metal, grain cars, stopped just where the dome car was. If it had gone another 30 feet, it would have covered us as well.
In the same car, one deck below, Martin Pedersen struggles to escape. But he can barely see what's happening in front of him. The window beside him shattered during impact, filling his eyes with broken glass. Almost 2 kilometers behind the engine, the caboose of train 413 finally lurches to a stop. Conductor Wayne Smith sees a ball of fire glowing in the distance, but he has no idea how bad the situation is.
Front end 413. I think we're in the bush or we're derailed. There is a big explosion up here, and we have chemicals on the train, so stay away from it. Stay away from the dangerous goods.
But all Smith gets in reply is an ominous silence. Passengers continue to struggle to escape the mangled wreck of their train as the smoke thickens.
I was trained well in the Royal Marines to survive and to act spontaneously. There was a window at the back of the dome car, and it was all cracked, and I just jumped up on the seat, smashed my head through the glass roof, and shouted, "Come on, let's get out."
Cuttle and others jump from the car.
And I looked back, and all of a sudden it ignited. Woof!
Down below in the lounge car, Martin Pedersen also manages to escape. But others aren't so lucky. Many are still trapped in the burning cars, including passenger Jamie Haight.
The roof of the coach had been crunched down. I mean, I'd lost my glasses. I couldn't see, I couldn't breathe. And here it was the porter that had been behind the snack bar, had opened up this exit way, and he had vamoosed out through it, and I took off out behind it too.
Snap out of it.
He was in shock.
Hey, snap out of it.
Hey, buddy, you pull it together here. You know, there's people in here and we got to do something about it, but...
Half blind without his glasses, Haight goes back inside, trying to help others out of the wreck.
413 here, dispatcher.
Back in the caboose, Smith is talking to the freight train's dispatcher, some 285 kilometers away in Edmonton.
Everything in the air.
We're gonna get a doctor out here and some ambulance.
Herb Timpey, the assistant conductor on the passenger train, can hear the conversation on his radio and breaks in.
Passenger coaches all over the ditch.
And get an ambulance.
And there's a whole bunch of cars on fire. You get that, dispatcher?
We need fire department here very badly. Some coaches are trapped with passengers inside. They're burning. I don't think the engineers lived through this one. It's a real mess.
Okay, that's right on the switch at Dalehurst, eh?
Yes, I'm gonna walk up there and see if I can be of any assistance.
What was the signal at Dalehurst when your head end called it?
Pardon me?
What was that signal on that signal at Dalehurst?
Well, I was calling him for the signal at Dalehurst quite a few times, but I kept calling him and there was no answer.
Well, it should have been red on the panel.
Well, he must have ran it then, dispatcher, because I could not get a hold of him. I tried and I tried.
Okay, all right.
Back at the head of the passenger train, Jamie Haight tries to save who he can.
Are you okay? I'm gonna help you.
Haight can hear the screams of men and women trapped in the flames.
And I can hear the women that I had dinner with the night before screaming, you know, to save her baby.
Haight was not able to save the mother and her child. They're out of reach under debris.
That was difficult.
People who were trapped and couldn't get out, screaming like you've never heard. One guy knew that his wife was trapped and he went back in and died with her. Another woman in the carriage under where we were had most of her leg cut off.
James Haight courageously decides to go back inside. The fire is a scorching 660 degrees, but Haight tries to save one more life.
But there was a chap right in front of me there, and it was the chap I had dinner with the night before. And all of a sudden the flames came and consumed him. He just sat up and rubbed his head, and because there's nothing more we could do it for him. Anybody in front of me in that coach was dead. For whatever the reasons, it wasn't my time to go then, for whatever the reasons.
Wayne Smith is devastated. He can't reach his two friends at the front of the freight train, and he can't understand what happened to cause such an enormous disaster. In Western Canada, a freight train has smashed head-on into a passenger train carrying more than 100 people. In the minutes after the collision, survivors are dragging themselves from the burning wreckage, while others are still trapped inside.
One of the girls that had been in the car in the morning, and I looked at her and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry to tell you,
He had no choice but to tell her what happened to her friend in the train.
Your friend was in the car here."
She died, trapped in the burning debris.
I felt like the worst person in the world, because I had to tell her. If I could have taken back that 1 second in time to not tell her, you know.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police Constable Mark Linnell is one of the first to arrive on the scene.
I was told there was a train derailment, not a train crash. I mean, there's a double whammy.
The RCMP officer came. He could hardly speak. His mouth dropped open, and he said, "I can't believe what I'm witnessing."
It's a horrifying scene. Pictures taken shortly after the crash show utter devastation.
I mean, I was just flabbergasted. I just couldn't believe it. And instant. That's quite the thing to see.
The collision is 18 kilometers from the town of Hinton. It takes emergency crews some 45 minutes to get there.
I was in the Marines in England for 14 years, and I'd seen a lot of disasters, man-made disasters, terrorist bombs. And I thought I'd seen it all. There was a lot of blunt force trauma, of course, flying glass, burns. And then I saw what appeared to be two bodies in the restaurant car hugging each other. So we found out later that was a man and wife. And this was one heck of a shock.
As Linnell is escorting survivors away from the site, he sees a lone man with a radio coming down the track.
How's the front end doing? What's your name?
Smith is about to learn that his colleagues aboard his train are dead.
Like, what happened? Like, did they make contact with the...
We're still under investigation, and there's not a lot I can tell you right now.
Okay, so they still might be...
I'm really sorry.
He'd be distraught and shaken, and yes, his train is wrecked, and all these people dead.
The Hinton train disaster is the worst railway accident to strike Canada in 35 years. More than $30 million in property are destroyed. 23 people are dead, and 71 others are severely injured. Wayne Smith is the only surviving crew member of the CN train, the only man who may be able to explain how an 11 million kilo freighter plowed headfirst into an oncoming passenger train. What he knows could be critical to unraveling the cause of the disaster. 2 days after the collision, the Alberta government establishes an official commission of inquiry, and the Honourable Mr. Justice Rene P. Foisy leads the investigation. Judge Foisy is a justice of the Alberta Court of Appeal.
It was reasonably simple. I mean, what caused the accident? But it turned out to be a lot more complicated than that because there were no easy answers as to what caused the accident.
Freight and passenger trains routinely use the same tracks without incident. What was different this time? Over the next 11 months, Foisy calls on 150 witnesses and specialists to help him find out.
I think what has most surprised me is the complex procedures, the equipment, the overall complexity that we have to look at in running a railroad and what goes on in running a railroad.
While Conductor Smith recovers from the accident, Foisy gets to work. He begins by studying the signals that should have told the freight train to stop. If they weren't working, the crew on 413 may not have thought they needed to slow down.
CN did a very in-depth test on the signal system, and it was determined that it was performing properly. We went further. We hired our own independent experts to test the system.
The switches which operate the signal lights were frozen in position after the accident. Electrical engineer Eugene Couch was hired to read them. Perhaps a mechanical fault in the system had turned them green, telling the freight train to speed through.
A fault does not give a positive green light to any situation. So if there was a fault in any control part of the system, it would have forced everything to go to red, which meant the passenger train would have stopped and would have forced the freight train to stop.
If a mechanical problem wasn't the cause, there was a more chilling possibility. Perhaps someone set the freight train lights to green on purpose, causing the two trains to collide. Couch dismissed that idea too.
To do that would mean that somebody would have to actually go there and really maliciously, change things. And there was no sign of any tampering on any mechanisms. Basically, our conclusion, we felt that the system was sound and was safe.
Foisey believes the lights were red, but the freight train ignored them. Perhaps another mechanical fault was behind the crash.
Well, I was calling him for the signal at Dalehurst Court.
In his statement after the crash, Conductor Wayne Smith told Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers that something was wrong with his radio that morning.
Because I could not get a hold of him. I tried and I tried.
Maybe the front of the train was having mechanical problems, but they weren't able to get in contact with Smith. Joseph Hebert examines the portable radios the crew used.
The first test was with the radio that was on the train that was in the accident at Hinton. The radio performed to specification.
But even if the radios themselves were working, there could be another problem. Many CN employees claim there are places along the tracks where radio communication is impossible, so-called dead spots.
And it's not a dead spot that's there 365 days out of the year.
The possibility was also examined and dismissed.
Sometimes you can't. Some radios are stronger, some are weaker.
The second test done as far as communications between the locomotive and the caboose was done with the same type of radio as was used at the time the accident took place. The field test with that type of radio had satisfactory performance.
The evidence was pretty clear, and we concluded that there were no dead spots.
One other possible explanation is examined. Natural phenomena, like the northern lights, can also affect radio performance.
We got to measure a medicine line.
Northern lights can build up very high currents in communications lines. Anything even hooked up to a radio could pick it up. My determination of it was that they were not a factor.
If the signals were red and the radios were working, why had the train crashed? Foisey examines an ingenious piece of technology, the hotbox detector. Sitting beside the track, hotboxes monitor the temperature of a train's wheels and axles. They also record the speed of trains as they roar by. When Foisey and his advisors examine the hotbox data, they make a telling discovery. When the front of the freight train passed the hotbox detector just after Hargwin, it was traveling a little over 60 kilometers an hour. But by the time the caboose passed it, the train was going more than 74 kilometers an hour. Despite the signals telling it to slow down, the train was speeding up.
For the last 5 miles, we were able to determine that the freight train was going at least 59 miles an hour, perhaps as high as 60 or 61. There were no brake applications before the crash as well.
The crew let the train travel too fast. They did not heed signals to stop, and they never applied the brakes. It all points to a train that was out of control.
Why there were no brake applications is difficult to understand.
With mechanical problems ruled out, Foisey begins to examine the crew of the freight train. Perhaps there's something about engineer Jack Hudson, who was in charge of the train, that could explain what happened that day. As Foisey begins sifting through Hudson's medical records and interviewing his family, he makes a disturbing discovery. A train collision in Western Canada has killed 23 people. Another 71 are injured. The man leading the inquiry into the disaster has ruled out mechanical problems. Judge René Foisey now takes a closer look at Jack Hudson, the 16-year veteran who was driving the freight train. When Foisey and the Commission review Hudson's medical files, they're shocked by what they discover.
Mr. Hudson was a man who was sick. He was an alcoholic. He had high blood pressure, which was problematic. He had diabetes. He had a pancreatic attack the summer before this accident. He had to wear a colostomy for a number of months.
Foisey wonders if this long list of illnesses could somehow have led to the train crash.
The engineer, Jack Hudson, had been killed outright in the crash and had severe injuries. So we couldn't determine whether there'd been a catastrophic medical event, whether he'd had a heart attack, for example, or a stroke, which had incapacitated him. But we were able to do toxicology, and there was no alcohol or drugs present.
He did have a lot of health problems, and he had some problems at home. These problems at home appeared to be on the mend, and that he was not the kind of man who, if he was going to commit suicide, would take 23 people with him and injure another 70, some of them very, very seriously. So we discounted that possibility of a suicide.
If it wasn't suicide, if Hudson did have a stroke or heart attack at the controls, why didn't his brakeman, Mark Edwards, take any action? Investigators come up with one plausible answer.
Did you get some rest?
Not much. Got a touch of the flu. Could use a full night's sleep.
Perhaps Edwards had been asleep on the job. Dr. Alison Smiley is an expert on sleep and fatigue.
Jack Hudson, he had at the very most, before he went on duty that day, 3.5 hours of sleep. And that is if he slept from the last moment somebody saw him till the moment somebody next saw him again, 3.5 hours. Brakeman said he had a touch of the flu and he'd had 5 hours sleep the night before. Wayne Smith similarly had insufficient sleep, about 5 hours before the collision.
As the freight train passed the signals telling it to stop, the entire crew may have been fast asleep.
You could work at any time of the day. So one day you might start at 4 o'clock in the morning, the next day you start at 2 in the afternoon. Their hours were so erratic, they were continually in a jet lag state because their physiology was never sort of fully adjusted to any particular working hours.
When it comes to staying alert, train engineers face many challenges, including long rides up and down the same stretch of track.
The tracks going by one after the other, it's a very soporific situation to work in, and easy to see how somebody, no matter how motivated, could fall asleep.
At the time, trains were equipped with safety devices that would automatically stop a train if the engine man died or fell asleep, the so-called dead man's pedal.
Basically, the engineer is supposed to keep his foot on the pedal, and while his foot is on the pedal, the train won't stop. If that pedal isn't depressed, then it will, after a number of seconds, give a warning, which is quite audible. And if nothing happens, then it will stop the train.
But Foisey discovers that for many trainmen, disabling the dead man's pedal is standard practice.
One of the excuses that was given by the engineers is that to go long distances, having to keep your foot on that pedal was very uncomfortable. And so that they would sometimes put something on the pedal, a lunchbox or something heavy enough to keep it depressed so that they could stretch their legs. Unfortunately, what was happening, this pedal was being depressed for long, long periods of time.
But even if Edwards and Hudson had fallen asleep at the front of the train, and the dead man's pedal was rigged, conductor Wayne Smith at the back could still have prevented the disaster. Almost 2 months into the Foisey inquiry, Smith takes the stand. Doctors had kept him from testifying earlier, saying he was too traumatized by the accident. Now, for the first time, investigators will hear Smith reconstruct events on board his train in the moments leading up to the disaster.
I was sitting looking out the back of the train from my desk when we passed mile board 169. That's the landmark that I used to initiate a call to the engineer to ask for the display at the Dalehurst approach signal. Head end to 413. What indication do you have at the Dalehurst approach signal 1703? Over.
The front end of the train is supposed to respond, letting Smith know that they've seen the signal lights telling them to slow down.
Head of 413. Can you hear me? Over. I probably called him 3 or 4 times. I didn't get a response on my gray radio. There was something wrong with it. What's the indication at signal 1703? Over.
It's a surprising piece of testimony. Foisey already knows the radios were working fine. When Smith is asked how fast he thought the train was going before the collision, Foisey gets another surprise.
I felt the front end give a light brake application on the caboose. Coming around the curve, I felt we were doing a track speed of about 50 miles an hour or less.
But according to the hotbox detectors, the train was traveling almost 16 kilometers an hour over track speed, and there was never any application of the brakes.
I went to my red radio, and I tried to get a hold of him on it. Jack, how's the Dalehurst approach signal 1703? I was calling him on channel 1 3 or 4 times, and there was no answer, so I tried to get a hold of him on different channels.
But once again, Smith's testimony doesn't add up. Foisey has heard from other trainmen who were monitoring their radios in the area that day. No one heard Smith call. Smith says he was still trying to contact Hudson when the end of the train raced past signals telling it to slow down.
Jack!
As an experienced trainman, Smith knows that the next set of lights will likely be a triple red, telling the train to stop. He was getting no answer, and the train wasn't slowing down. An emergency brake cord was in easy reach, but Smith never pulled it.
Jack, are you there?
With Hudson mysteriously silent, Smith says he does nothing but continue to call the front end.
Front end, Jack, come in.
Why, in the circumstances that you've described, did you not pull the brake?
I felt the engineer had the train under control. I felt he, in fact, was doing what was necessary to control the train at that point. I never felt at any point in time that I should pull the emergency brake. At that time, I didn't think that anything was wrong.
That's the point I make, Mr. Smith, that when there's a problem with the radio, you've been trained over the years to observe the signals.
And it would have been the last thing I would have done.
He didn't pull the brake, he didn't pull the air because he felt that it hadn't reached that point. Basically, that was his evidence, and I had a lot of difficulty with that because if that point hadn't been reached, when was it going to be reached, if ever?
Smith's contradictory testimony is complete. Judge Foisey is now ready to close his case and lay the blame on those responsible for the disaster. The inquiry into one of the deadliest train crashes in Canada is complete. 23 people were killed when a freight train crashed head-on into a passenger train near Hinton, Alberta. Chief Investigator Renee Foisey has explored every angle, from technical malfunction to human error. He's now ready to deliver his report on what went wrong that day. In his 205-page report, Foisey parcels out the blame, naming all the key offenders. Foisey writes that the train's engineer, Jack Hudson, failed to observe and obey light signals, commanding him to stop his train before it entered the single track. If Hudson was unable to do his job, brakeman Mark Edwards failed to intervene. He also ignored the light signals and didn't brake the train before it entered the single track. Conductor Wayne Smith was guilty too. He had failed to follow operating rules and pull the emergency brake when he couldn't contact the 2 men at the front of the train. In a statement to police, he had even suggested that he thought they were sleeping.
Said that my head end was asleep. Do you recall making that response, sir?
Yes, I do.
With so many contradictions in his testimony, Foisey rules that the conductor's evidence is unreliable.
I wasn't sure what had happened, and I went to my back desk. I jumped on from the cupola and ran for. It seemed like we were just keeping going. There was no immediate stopping. The caboose kept sliding.
Instead, Foisey emphasizes that Smith, like Edwards and Hudson, was dangerously tired that morning.
I just wanted to get home, actually, at the time.
But the crew aren't the only ones Foisey blames for the accident. According to the Foisey report, Jack Hudson may well have had a stroke or heart attack before the collision. But CN management had known about Hudson's medical record for years.
He managed to accumulate, I think it was 40 or 50 demerits, and at 60, you're fired. But after he got to that level, there were some other infractions which weren't recorded.
Foisey also calls attention to the rules that were routinely ignored, such as rigging the dead man's pedal and taking the train on the fly.
The conclusion we came to is that there was a lot to be desired on the part of CN, and that, yes, there was certainly some laxness and some complacency when it came to these areas.
I'll get a measure at Medicine Lodge here. I haven't had a chance yet.
Oh, that's, you got pretty well grain cars, eh?
Yeah, I think so.
There is a lesson to be learned here. It's that when you have rules, you obey the rules and you enforce the rules. If it becomes too much of a fraternity and of a buddy-buddy system, it gets lax, and problems occur, and this tragedy was one of them.
Foisey demands that CN improve its safety equipment, recommending that all trains be equipped with reset safety control technology. These systems are much more complicated than a dead man's pedal. If constant attention is not paid to the train, alarms sound and the train eventually shuts down. It's equipment which has proved valuable several times since the disaster.
There was a study done with CN 10 years after this accident. They found something like 90% of the train engineers saying that they had been woken by the alerting device at least once.
In response to Foisey's report, CN Rail creates one of the most sophisticated fatigue countermeasures programs in the world. Trainmen are no longer on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Napping is no longer frowned upon. Rest houses have been created and improved, and locomotive cabs made more comfortable. For the victims of the Hinton disaster of 1986, changes to Canadian railroading come too late.
I still remember the people that were killed in the accident and good friends I had on the railroad. And that really, it does bother me.
It's 20 years nearly. And I'm still going strong. Very lucky.
I don't equate it to luck, no. No, too much of a tragedy to think about luck. There's too much hurt that happened inside of me. It took me quite a while to rebuild my sanity again.
I got over it fairly quickly and got on with their life. There may be lots of other people who weren't as lucky.
You can be going along in life, and then something can come along and just kind of destroy your very foundation or shatter your very foundation. And through no fault of your own. But life has a habit of doing that. But the other thing I can share with them is that you can recover from it. There is a tomorrow.
the time, it was the worst crash in aviation history.
It was just a scene of absolute, utter devastation.
In 1974, more than 300 people died when their plane fell from the sky.
There's barely anything left here that's recognizable as being a part of an aircraft.
You couldn't walk anywhere without the danger you were going to stand on a part of a human being.
The key to understanding the disaster is found thousands of kilometers away. An unusual piece of evidence that tells the troubling story of a crash that could have been prevented.
Mayday, Mayday.
June the 12th, 1972. One of the newest members of American Airlines fleet is in Detroit, Michigan.
John, Page.
Flight 96, a brand new DC-10, is getting ready for takeoff. Captain Bryce McCormick and co-pilot Paige Whitney have been in the plane for hours.
Back there, so when we're in flight, if you can get a chance just to look at that.
Detroit is just a stopover on a flight from LA to Buffalo and then to New York.
You got there? You ready to try one, Page?
All right, sir.
McCormick has flown the plane out from California, but Whitney is going to fly the next leg. Both men want as much time at the controls as possible. Neither one of them has more than 75 hours flying the DC-10. Few pilots have more. There simply aren't enough of the planes in the air. In 1972, the DC-10 had just been introduced. The plane is the latest advance to passenger jets. Its style and its size set it apart from other airliners. The McDonnell Douglas Corporation has spent more than $1 billion developing it.
In the late 60s, there was a race going among the three major manufacturers of jetliners, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, and Lockheed, to see who could get the first jumbo out. So they got really busy on getting this DC-10 into production as fast as they could. And one of the things that they could not suffer were many delays based on some problem with the design.
American Airlines is one of the first companies to buy the plane. Flight 96 is one of those planes. Just the 5th DC-10 ever built. Cydia Smith has just been trained to be the chief flight attendant on the DC-10.
I was excited because it was one of the first jumbos that we had. And I was going to have the opportunity to fly number 1, which is what I always wanted to do on a big jet.
Okay, you got it? Hand on the wheel.
I got you.
E1, rotate.
Just after 7 in the evening, Flight 96 lifts off from Detroit Airport. Just minutes after takeoff, the plane is rising easily through 3,500 meters over Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
I was sitting in my seat, and the captain had turned off the fasten seatbelt sign, and I was making my way to the galley, and I had to go sort of downhill because we were climbing to go to the galley to turn on the coffee. when I punched the coffee and I moved over to one side, that's when it happened. I remember falling over because the plane was like this, but all of a sudden it just went like this. I saw ceiling compartments fall, and I saw things coming out of pockets and everything, and I thought to myself, oh boy. It felt like the last day of my life.
We hit something! We lost an engine here!
In the cockpit, the crew is fighting for control of their jet. The throttles which control the 3 engines have snapped to idle. The plane loses almost all its thrust. The huge jet begins slowing down.
The plane immediately took a huge drop. And the next thing that happened was I was hit in the face with a piece of the plane. My husband was frantically trying to find a stewardess to give me something to put a pressure on my face to stop the bleeding.
Let me have it!
McCormick takes over control of the plane. He and Whitney wrestle the jet level. But Flight 96 has been badly damaged.
Have we got hydraulics? No, I've got full rudder here.
The rudder on the tail, which controls the direction of the jet, is jammed to the right. That's forcing the plane to swing dramatically in that direction. While McCormick fights to turn his damaged plane back to Detroit, Cydia Smith is shocked to see a gaping hole in the floor of the main passenger cabin.
People were asking me, what to do, and I knew that I didn't know what to tell them.
Smith has been able to account for all of her passengers. But flight attendant Sandra McConnell is missing.
Sandra! Can you hear me? Sandra, where are you?
And finally, I saw her come out of one of the bathrooms.
McConnell has to cross the hole in the floor to move to safety.
And almost every step she took, the floor kept collapsing.
The crew brings up power to the engines on the wings. But the third engine on the tail stubbornly refuses to respond.
Center, this is American Airlines Flight 96. We got an emergency.
American 96, roger. Type of emergency?
We've got a jammed rudder. We need to get down and make an approach.
Along with his engine and his rudder, McCormick is also having trouble controlling the elevators on the tail of the plane. They help him move the massive plane up and down. They're slow to respond, but he can move them. The situation isn't completely hopeless.
I think it's going to fly!
American 96, turn further right, heading 200.
Without complete control of the elevators, and with a rudder that's frozen to the right, McCormick has to use his engines to turn the plane. By increasing the thrust on one side of the plane, he can change direction. But it won't be fast.
I have no rudder control whatsoever, so our turns are going to have to be very slow and cautious.
All of the passengers move as far away from the hole in the back as possible. But apart from the cut to Loretta Kaminsky, so far there are no other serious injuries.
Captain, there's a hole in the back of the plane. A hole? Yes, sir. What do you want us to do? Get everyone ready for an emergency emergency landing.
Bryce McCormick's DC-10 is badly damaged. The lives of everyone on board now depend entirely on his ability to land a plane that can barely fly. With explosive suddenness, a short flight from Detroit to Buffalo has become the most challenging flight of Captain Bryce McCormick's career. He's down an engine, and he can't move his rudder. As he heads back to Detroit, McCormick begins to slow his plane down so it can land safely. But when he does, his plane begins falling dangerously fast. Ideally, McCormick should be descending at 700 feet a minute. But now he's falling more than twice that fast. 1,600 feet per minute.
What's the sink rate? Sink rate, 1,600!
At this rate, McCormick will crash well short of the runway. He increases power to his engines to slow his fall.
Sink rate, 700.
McCormick has slowed the plane's descent to 700 feet per minute. But to do that, he's had to increase his forward airspeed, which means he'll be landing far faster than usual. For the first time since the beginning of the crisis, McCormick talks to the passengers.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking.
We've had a small problem, but the plane is under control now, and we're heading back to Detroit for an emergency landing.
Bryce McCormick was as calm as if he were welcoming you on the plane.
As the plane nears the airport, flight attendants ask passengers to remove their shoes and any sharp pieces of jewelry.
They had to take off their shoes and glasses. We collected everything in a blanket.
Less than half an hour after leaving, the badly damaged DC-10 struggles back to the Detroit airport.
The few minutes that it took to get back to Detroit were the longest minutes that I will ever remember spending on an airplane, because we were sure that we were not going to survive.
Captain Bryce McCormick now needs to give the jet even more power to push the nose up for landing. His plane is still drifting to the right and traveling fast.
I have no rudder to straighten it out when it hits.
The DC-10 with 67 people aboard roars toward the runway at almost 300 kilometers an hour.
The landing was the most frightening part of the entire flight.
When the plane hits the ground, it begins veering hard to the right.
Once the plane landed, it seemed like we just went on forever. I mean, it was just forever.
One set of landing gear wheels runs off the runway and through the grass. After a harrowing touchdown, the plane eventually comes to a stop just 300 meters from the end of the runway.
Okay. Engines off at your discretion.
Shut him down.
Every woman wanted to hug him, and he was just amazing, because it was just at that moment that we all realized that we were alive because of him, that he literally had saved our lives.
If you take a look at something like this and you say, well, there's good flying and there's bad flying, this is beyond good. This is superlative. This is using every instinct you have as an airman and all the capabilities you have to stay calm enough to get the situation assessed.
With the plane on the ground, the crew has its first opportunity to inspect the damage.
The captain and I walked back when everybody was off. We walked back to the back, and we just looked up and saw this hole. And it was just so weird.
There's no indication that the jet hit something as the pilots first thought. What has caused such damage to the airliner?
The hole was so enormous that if anyone had been sitting in the seats that were there, they would have been sucked out immediately. At that point, they still felt it might have been a bomb.
But while the incident had happened with explosive suddenness, no indication of a bomb is found. As investigators begin their work, they discover that not all of the DC-10 is at the Detroit airport. A coffin that the plane was carrying in its cargo hold is discovered 30 kilometers away from the Detroit airport, near Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Investigators also find the plane's rear cargo door.
Doors are not supposed to fall off airplanes, especially since it was a rather new airplane. You would not expect something like that to happen.
When they examine the cargo area of the plane, they discover that the very design of the door makes it a potential weak spot.
These don't look like they...
Most doors on a jet open inward. In fact, the door is slightly larger than the frame it fits into. As the pressure builds inside a jet, this type of plug door is actually forced into the frame of the aircraft. The design makes the door extremely safe. But McDonnell Douglas designed the cargo door on the DC-10 to open outward. That decision was made to increase the amount of storage space on the plane. When it's closed, hooks on the DC-10's door grab hold of a bar on the plane's door frame. To make sure it's closed, baggage handlers push down on a lever, which drives locking pins through the hooks, which hold them in place. When investigators examine the cargo area of the plane, they don't find any structural damage around the door. When they study the locks on the cargo door itself, they find that the latches are not completely closed. And the pins that are supposed to make sure the door is locked are not in their locked position.
When we interrogated the cargo handler that closed the door, it became immediately apparent that he used excessive force to close the door. And in fact, he said he had to use his knee to get the door handle to go flush.
Investigators make a frightening discovery. It's possible to close the lever on the outside of the door, even if the hooks and locking pins are not in the closed position. Paul Eddy is a journalist who investigated the history of the DC-10.
What Windsor showed is that you could actually pull the handle in order to buckle the top fixture so that the handle went home properly, but the locking pins had not gone through the spools.
Engage the lever.
This means that baggage handlers can believe the door is closed when it's not. Not only can the outside lever be closed without the locks being fully engaged, there's no way for the crew of the plane to know. The faulty locking pins will still turn off the warning light, even though they aren't in their proper position. The door was a ticking time bomb. As passenger jets climb, the difference between the pressure inside the plane and the pressure outside the plane grows. If a door isn't properly shut, it will blow out with explosive force. The problem on the American Airlines flight began as the plane passed through 3,500 meters. When the door blew, the coffin in the cargo hold was sucked out. When the air pressure inside the plane was released, anything that wasn't firmly attached was pulled out of the airliner.
It's a really startling thing if you're not expecting it. What you've got is a lot of air stuffed inside this pressure vessel that now wants to get out. And the bigger the airplane is, the more powerful the hurricane of air leaving the airplane is during that period of time.
By itself, explosive decompression does not make a plane unflyable. So why had Captain McCormick experienced such difficulties controlling his jet? Investigators take a closer look at the back of the plane's cabin and learn that the very design of the DC-10 makes it vulnerable. When the cargo door blew off, there was so much pressure on the floor of the cabin that it collapsed into the cargo compartment below. When it did, the floor ripped into some of the plane's critical control systems.
When it collapsed the floor, it took the cables that controlled number 2 engine, and it took most of the cables, or impeded most of the cables that had to do with the flight controls in the back.
I think it's going to fly!
It left McCormick just enough control to keep his plane level. The remarkable flying of Bryce McCormick had saved the lives of everyone on board Flight 96. But there was a problem with one of the newest and most expensive planes flying over North America.
In the Windsor incident, there was an obvious flaw. And that's where the NTSB said, look, here is really the smoking gun, the ability to close that thing without having all those locks engaged. Let's make sure we change this system right now. Every DC-10 operator needs to know this.
I want everything checked. I want all the bolts checked first.
Chuck Miller is the head of the NTSB's Aviation Safety Bureau.
You have to check all the latches, okay? Every single latch.
It's his responsibility to point out problems with the new DC-10 and propose solutions. He helps write the fixes he thinks McDonnell Douglas needs to make to keep the plane safe.
He was a very, very professional man, and he had his investigators had enormous respect for him. Chuck didn't sit back in the office. Chuck was always on the scene.
For Chuck Miller, fixing the DC-10 is a matter of professional pride. For McDonnell Douglas, the near accident over Windsor has enormous implications. Their billion-dollar gamble came close to tumbling from the sky. If anything else goes wrong, the company itself could be at stake. March the 3rd, 1974. A perfect spring-like day in Paris. It's been almost 2 years since a DC-10 came close to crashing near Windsor, Ontario. Now more than 50 of the new planes are flying around the world. One of them, Plane 29, is owned by Turkish Airlines. Normally, the last leg of this trip from Turkey to England wouldn't be very crowded. But today, the DC-10 is filling up fast. People are squeezing into seats throughout the plane. A strike at a British airline has passengers scrambling for any flight back to London. Wendy Wheel is one of many last-minute additions to the flight. A model, she's returning home after a shoot in Spain.
We'd been married for 18 months, and we were about to start a family. I believe the secret of her success for modeling was not just that she was a very attractive girl and good model material, but she was genuinely liked by all the photographers because she had such a pleasing, lovely, light personality.
With all the new passengers boarding, the flight is a little behind schedule. And it's not only the crew who are waiting. At the back of the plane is baggage handler Mohammed Mahmoudi. With all the new passengers, he's not sure if there are any more bags to load.
C'est tout. Vous êtes fini. Bien, j'ai l'affaire.
Not expecting any other luggage, Mahmoudi locks the rear cargo door. The DC-10 is set to go. Just after 12:30 in the afternoon, THY Flight 981 lifts off into the skies above Paris. London is less than an hour away.
Race control, this is Tango Hotel Yankee 981. We're at 60, requesting clearance to flight level 230.
Tango Hotel Yankee 981, you are cleared to flight level 230.
981, roger.
As it flies away from the airport, the DC-10 continues to gain altitude. 2,700 meters, 3,000 meters, 3,300 meters. The huge jet shudders and banks to the left.
What happened? The cabin blew out! Are you sure?
Just 16 seconds after the start of the crisis, the crew struggles to save their crippled jet. The nose is pitching down, the plane picking up speed.
Bring it up! Pull our nose up! I can't bring it up! She doesn't respond!
Passengers at the back of the plane witness a horrifying scene. 2 rows of seats have simply disappeared. Through a huge hole in the floor, passengers can see the sky over France.
7,000 feet! Hydraulics! We've lost it!
The crew discovers that they have no hydraulic power with which to control the plane. Without it, they can't move their rudder or elevators. Even without its most basic controls, the plane begins to level out. But it's fallen too far.
Looks like we're going to hit the ground! Speed!
The DC-10 is traveling almost 800 kilometers an hour. The flight from Paris to London never even makes it to the English Channel. Just 9 minutes after taking off, Turkish Airways Flight 981 becomes the worst plane crash of all time. In London, the flight is listed as delayed. The news of the crash comes out slowly.
I went to the ticket office kiosk and I asked what has happened to the flight, and instantly the look on the gentleman's face behind the counter told me something was wrong, instantly.
There's barely anything left here that's recognizable as being a part of an aircraft.
I looked on the television and I just thought, well, I just hope she's dead. because I just saw the carnage of the forest in Senlis, and it was like looking at a First World War trench movie.
Flight 981, carrying 346 passengers, virtually disintegrates on impact. There are no survivors.
It was just a scene of absolute, utter devastation. And the litter of personal possessions, electric wires, bits of metal, bits of bodies, just strewn everywhere. I mean, you couldn't walk anywhere without the danger you were going to stand on a part of a human being. I still have nightmares about this, even though it's 33 years ago.
Investigators for the French Accident Investigation Bureau are quickly on the scene.
My first job was to evaluate the scope of the wreckage and to begin the first investigation on the spot. At first, I was unable to know what has happened. I was just seeing that a terrible crash has occurred and that it will be a very hard work for the investigators.
Despite the enormous force of the crash, the black boxes, made of 3 layers of hardened steel and insulation, survive. Their contents could provide valuable clues about the crash.
Most of the speculation was that it must have been a bomb, because, you know, you've got a almost brand new, very powerful aeroplane flying in clear blue sky, and it gets to 12,000 feet and falls out of it.
Investigators are called to a field 15 kilometers from the crash site. They find a piece of fuselage and 2 rows of seats from the DC-10. Somehow, they fell free of the airliner before the rest of the plane smashed into the forest. When investigators arrive, the bodies of the passengers who were in the seats have already been removed. When relatives of those who died in the crash arrive in France, they're directed to a small church in the town of Senlis.
One of the saddest sights I've ever seen is in this church. They laid out on tables everything they'd found, you know, clothing, possessions, teddy bears, rings, watches. And then relatives who wanted to were allowed to come and walk around these trestle tables with all this stuff laid out.
They produced a little packet with my wife's wedding ring and rings, engagement ring. It was all pretty battered up, so you could imagine the thoughts that went through my mind.
Since the accident involves an American plane, the NTSB's Chuck Miller joins the investigation. For the second time in 2 years, he's dealing with a problem with the DC-10.
I don't believe that Miller suspected for one moment that the door hadn't been fixed after Windsor.
But it becomes clear that the piece of fuselage found in France is in fact the plane's rear cargo door. It seems like a repeat of the Windsor accident. Miller is left with a haunting question. Why hadn't the problem been fixed?
When he saw the door, of course, saw that it hadn't been done. The fix hadn't been made. And that's when I think his anger became very, very strong indeed.
Miller takes an unusual step. Although the official investigation is just beginning, he gives journalist Paul Eddy an important tip.
I said, have you got any ideas what made the door come off? He said, yeah. If I were you, I'd go and look at a place called Windsor, Ontario.
Hello. I'm Chuck Miller.
Miller shares his suspicions with the French investigators.
Could you please pass these around? These were taken on June 12th, 1972, right after the incident.
We have asked for the report on the Windsor accident, and our American colleagues were also volunteers to give us a lot of details.
Now, we had an American Airlines flight from Detroit to Buffalo have its cargo door blow off.
And he has been very frank and had explained what he was thinking of the Windsor accident.
After all the work done during the American Airlines investigation, had something been overlooked? Was there another problem with McDonnell Douglas's enormous plane? With the information from Chuck Miller, French investigators take a closer look at the plane's cargo door. They make a shocking discovery. There is no new problem. It's just like the American Airlines case all over again. The latches that are supposed to hold the cargo door closed aren't locked. And since 2 rows of seats were sucked out of the DC-10 over Paris, it's clear that the floor on the plane collapsed, just as it had in Windsor.
It looks like we're going to hit the ground! I can't bring it up! Doesn't reach.
In fact, when investigators listen to the cockpit voice recorder, they find that the Turkish flight crew had even less control of their plane than the crew of American Airlines Flight 96.
We need to get down and make an approach.
I think it's going to fly!
Over Windsor, Bryce McCormick was able to recover his plane and land it. But in Paris, all the hydraulic systems were destroyed.
We've lost it!
The hydraulic fluid helps crews move the rudder and elevators on the tail. Not being able to control them meant the crew couldn't keep their plane in the sky.
The basic problem was the Paris flight was much heavier in terms of the number of people on board. The floor, when it collapsed with such a tremendous amount of pressure that it literally severed all the cables and control to the back. They had no hope after that point.
You and each of you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about
Shortly after the crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 981, Chuck Miller is back in the United States.
Our first witness this morning is Mr. C.O. Miller, Director of the Bureau of Aviation Safety of the NTSB.
This time, he's facing questions from American senators.
A potentially catastrophic design defect.
A special hearing begins to find out how a problem that was identified in 1972 could bring another plane down 2 years later.
Of course, our understanding up to this time, they all had been.
What you've got to now discover is why wasn't that door fixed? Why would a major, venerable, mighty American corporation deliberately do something like this?
Less than a month after the near crash over Windsor, the NTSB had made 2 very specific recommendations. Miller and his investigators recommended that a change be made to the locking mechanism.
Engage the lever.
They wanted to make sure that it was physically impossible for baggage handlers to close the lever without the locking pins being in place. They also suggested that vents be put into the floors of all DC-10s. This would rapidly allow the pressurized cabin air to equalize without collapsing the floor. But in the 2 years since the accident, neither one of these recommendations was implemented.
There is a fundamental problem at the heart of aviation safety, and has been in the United States for a very long time, and that is that it's the job of the NTSB to discover what's happened and to come up with recommendations as to how to prevent it happening again, but it has absolutely no authority to implement them.
The NTSB does not have regulatory authority. They have to turn to the FAA, as they did, and say, we want these things done. And that's where the system went wrong.
If the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, issues an airworthiness directive, planes are pulled out of service until the proper fix is made. But as serious as the problems on the DC-10 were, no airworthiness directive was ever issued. A so-called gentleman's agreement between the head of the FAA and the head of McDonnell Douglas stopped it from happening.
The gentleman's agreement is the root cause of Paris. There is no question that if an airworthiness directive had been issued, as it should have been after Windsor, Paris would not have happened. It was an entirely avoidable accident.
McDonnell Douglas assured the FAA that it would fix the problem voluntarily. An airworthiness directive would cast a shadow on the still fledgling DC-10.
The last thing in the world you want is for the public or any of the airlines who are going to be operating these airplanes to think, oh, maybe there's some flaws in this bird. And so an airworthiness directive, especially one that requires you to go back and re-engineer something, is a really horrific thought for a manufacturer.
McDonnell Douglas did make changes to the way the cargo door was built. A peephole was cut in the bottom of the door so baggage handlers could see if the locking pins had engaged. Several warning signs were also attached to the plane's door. The company also made other changes to the DC-10. These included increasing the length of the locking pins and attaching a plate to the inside of the door. This plate would make it physically impossible to push down the lever if the door wasn't properly locked. But each of the proposed fixes had its own problem. Many baggage handlers didn't know what the small window in the door was for. And the baggage handler in Paris read and spoke 3 languages, but not English, the only language in which the warning signs were written. The support plate that was supposed to be installed in the door was never attached to the jet that crashed in Paris. Papers confirming the completion of the work are also uncovered. But no matter what the paper trail says, the fix was never made.
Again, the problem is you don't have an independent FAA inspector coming along to look and see it and then put his stamp on it, because it wasn't an airworthiness directive.
In the years following the Turkish Airlines crash, an enormous flurry of lawsuits are filed in California. The tragic story of the DC-10 has one more surprise in store. It's 1974, and an unprecedented series of lawsuits are being filed against McDonnell Douglas. The families of those who died near Paris want someone held responsible.
As time went by, I learned more and more about what actually happened and realized that it was not an accident as we would call an accident. It was totally avoidable. My goal was to expose these people.
In the weeks leading up to the trial, lawyers who are involved in the case have access to the entire history of the DC-10's development. They're not the only ones who pore through the evidence. So does journalist Paul Eddy.
We were determined to get to those documents and that testimony. Somebody gave us a key to the depository where the documents were, and so at night we would go in and then had a huge accumulated pile of documents to go through in order to find out what they've been up to.
Reading through the immense pile of paper, Eddy makes an incredible discovery. A memo written by Don Applegate, the Director of Product Engineering for Convair, the company who'd built the cargo door for McDonnell Douglas.
I think the point when we knew we got them was the Applegate Memorandum that specifically pre-warned this would happen.
The memo is a damning indictment of the cargo doors that were being made for the DC-10 and the lack of venting in the cabin floors. It warns that it's only a matter of time before there's a major disaster involving the doors.
The airplane demonstrated an inherent susceptibility to catastrophic failure when exposed to explosive decompression of the cargo compartment.
The memo, written just weeks after the near disaster in Windsor, recommends that immediate changes be made to the DC-10 cargo door.
You know you've got them. You know you've got them because you know they knew.
During the court case, another chilling find is made. Not only did McDonnell Douglas know about the problem after Windsor, they knew during the development of the DC-10. 4 years before the Paris crash, 2 years before Windsor, the cargo door failed during a pressure test. The company knew there was a problem, but the fundamental design of the door stayed the same.
I could not believe a large corporation, McDonnell Douglas at the time, could do such a thing, could risk our lives, ordinary people's lives, for the sake of money.
Well, in aviation, it's called tombstone technology. In other words, we always have the balance of money. And unfortunately, over the years, it has been true more times than not that we have had to wait until we had enough people die in an accident to say, you know, we really are going to have to spend the money over here.
The Applegate memo and other information that comes out during the court case leads to one of the biggest settlements in the history of aviation. McDonnell Douglas paid over $80 million in damages. After the Paris crash, foolproof changes were finally made to the DC-10 cargo door. And this time, nothing was left to chance. The FAA issued an airworthiness directive that ensured the doors would never again open in mid-air. And it worked. After Paris, there wasn't another serious incident involving the cargo doors on a DC-10. But the plane's history and an intensely competitive industry did have an impact. McDonnell Douglas sold far fewer commercial DC-10s than it had once hoped for.
Most of the pilots that I know who have flown the DC-10 over the years really love the old bird. She's probably a little more clunky than the 747 in terms of her heaviness of flight controls, but it's still a lovely bird to fly.
That's fine, but you can't disassociate either the airplane or the company from the awful reputation that the crash left.
Eventually, McDonnell Douglas itself disappears. The company was bought by Boeing in 1996. In the forest outside Paris, a monument now stands honoring those who were killed on Flight 981. A permanent reminder of one of the most disturbing crashes in the history of aviation.
You never forget. And I've gone on to lead my life for 30-odd years, but I've never forgotten. People to this day think it was an accident, and it wasn't.
B-Tours 28, you are clear for takeoff.
Knots. Stop! Don't hammer the brakes. Don't hammer the brakes.
137 people are on board this British Air Tours flight. Within minutes, nearly half of them will be dead.
This should not really have happened.
Evacuate! Evacuate!
The aircraft didn't even get airborne. It didn't run off the runway, and yet still 55 people were killed.
For investigators, it's a familiar routine. Reconstructing the final moments inside the cabin, analyzing the wreckage and the flight data recorders. In the end, they turn to a psychologist to help them figure out how a survivable emergency turned into one of British aviation's most horrific disasters. It's just before 6 in the morning on August the 22nd, 1985. Manchester's airport is coming to life. The first flights of the day are being prepped for departure. British Air Tours Flight 28 is scheduled to take 131 passengers from Manchester to the Greek island of Corfu. British Air Tours is a division of British Airways, specializing in low-cost flights to vacation destinations. It's a chilly morning. A slight breeze is blowing, ideal flying weather. Most of the passengers on this early morning flight are traveling on vacation. Lindsay Davis is heading to Greece with her boyfriend, Charlie Thixon.
All right, let's go.
We'd been going out with each other for a year, and that's one of the reasons we were so excited about it. You know, it was our first holiday together.
Captain Peter Terrington is in command.
I was the senior training captain on the fleet.
First Officer Brian Love is being trained by Terrington.
He was going to perform the takeoff and landing as part of his training.
All right, Captain? Yep. Briefing then, Brian. Airfield emergencies, you handling the aircraft. What are the 4 things you're going to stop for?
Fire, failure, configuration warning, or you shouting stop.
Okay, so you bring the thing to a stop, and I'll take over the aircraft and leave you to deal with the emergency. I'll liaise with ATC, okay?
If you've talked about the possibility of an emergency and talked over what you will do, then if it actually happens, it's easier to recall those items.
Okay, Brian, start 2.
Starting 2. Oil pressure rising.
Okay, go on.
25, 26, 27, 28, 29. 129 plus 2 on board, Captain. All strapped in, doors are closed and automatic.
Thank you, Arthur.
The crew is flying a Boeing 737. It takes just 4 minutes for the plane to reach the foot of the runway.
B-Tours 28, you are clear for takeoff.
The 737 has 3,000 meters to get to takeoff speed. The engines are pushed to high power.
I was sitting by the window, looking out of the window. Everything was normal. The plane was going quite fast.
80 knots.
Check.
We heard a dull thud, which sounded as if it came from outside. I was really keen to see what was going on outside, but couldn't see anything.
Captain Terrington needs to act fast.
Stop.
And the immediate reaction was to stop. We were quite a few knots below our decision speed, so I very quickly closed the throttles and applied reverse thrust.
We could feel the aircraft slowing down, and Arthur said, "Oh, I think we've blown a tyre," and I didn't know, so we just waited to hear it.
Don't hammer the brakes. Don't hammer the brakes.
I thought the tyre might have gone and would cause damage to the undercarriage if we braked too strongly.
Probably nothing. I wouldn't worry.
And just assumed that maybe a tyre had burst, so I wasn't really alarmed at that point. My thought at that time was, oh, okay, we're going to get off this plane and probably have to move all the luggage onto another plane and take off.
Soon, passengers on the left side of the plane see the real problem.
I could see orange flames inside the back of the engine. And at that point, I thought, it's obviously not a burst tyre, that wouldn't cause that, and this is perhaps something a bit more serious.
Let me by. I'm not staying there.
But at that point, I knew that I wanted to get off the plane, and I wasn't happy at all. I knew that there was a fire, and I just wanted to get away from the fire.
Smoke is seeping into the cabin.
Please sit down.
My nearest exit was at the back. I didn't want to go to the back because the smoke was coming in there. So I decided in my mind that I was going to go through the front. I said to Charlie,
"Come on, we're going."
And that's when I started going towards the front of the plane.
Stop it. 28 Mike, we are abandoning takeoff. Looks like we've got a fire on number 1.
Looks like there's a lot of fire.
Thank you.
Plane on fire, runway 24.
From where he's sitting, Captain Terrington can't see how bad the fire is. He needs advice from the tower.
We have to get the passengers off.
I would do by the starboard side.
Terrington decides to pull off the runway.
Evacuate to the starboard side, please. Fire drill, engine number 1. Shutting down 2.
Evacuate! Evacuate! Please stay calm.
Before the flight crew leaves the cockpit, they must complete a 15-step checklist.
Parking brake.
Set.
Speed brake lever.
Down.
But time is running out.
We had an evacuation checklist, but it was 4 pages long, and the last item was to get the passengers off.
Engine and APU fire warning switches.
This didn't cover my problem at all.
On the 737, there are 4 cabin doors. The 2 in the back are covered in flames and smoke, leaving only 2 for 137 people. Then a mechanical problem eliminates one of those.
Well, Arthur was opening one right, and it was really it was really trying to open. It was really hard to open.
The back of the cabin is filling with smoke. It's making breathing difficult. Passengers rush forward.
It just seemed to go on forever before they started evacuating. And that's when I thought, I'm not going to get off, it's going to blow up with all of us on it.
Engine and APU fire warning switches.
Right now, all 137 people on board are alive. But with every second, their odds of surviving are decreasing. Flight 28 is becoming a death trap. The jammed door on the right side of British Air Tours Flight 28 leaves the crew no choice. They must get the passengers out from the side of the plane that's burning.
soon as we opened the door, the fire service were already around, shooting foam up the slide that came into the galley floor. We wanted to start to evacuate the passengers, but there's a bit of a bottleneck and nobody was coming forward. The aisle is quite narrow where the galley is, and they were and then they were pushing forward, and I could see this boy that was really sort of pushed against the wall. He couldn't get out, so I pulled him by his T-shirt, had the yellow T-shirt on, and he sort of tumbled forward, and after that, everybody sort of just tumbled in behind him. And we just directed him down the slide. In training, they tell you to, bring people to the door, and you tell them to jump.
Desperate to get people off the plane quickly, the purser returns to the jammed door. After several attempts, he manages to force it open.
The only time I turned around was to make sure that Charlie was following me.
See you out there?
One thing I did see when I looked back was people going to the front, towards the front of the plane where the seats are, and pushing the seats forward, folding them down as they went along. So people were trying to rush forward from the back. The chute was open and people were just jumping up straight onto the chute. As I got to the bottom, I didn't look back at all. I was just wanting to get off.
Dozens of passengers have made it off the plane, but there are still many more inside.
But it was smouldering and it was black, thick black smoke. And Charlie had said that after you'd gone, this black smoke came down, he said, and everybody was screaming and panicking. He said people are going to die in there.
Standby power switch.
Captain Peter Terrington and his first officer Brian Love are still aboard the burning airplane, and they still haven't completed the steps required to evacuate.
There was 4 tons of fuel coming out of that aircraft wing tank.
Okay, go, Brian. Go, Brian.
I could see quite a lot of flames.
Completing the checklist would put their lives at risk.
We did as many items as we could, and then we both went out of the flight deck window.
There are no more passengers at the exits, so Joanna Toff decides to see if anyone else is left in the cabin.
And the smoke was you could touch it. It was so thick, and you could take it was awful, really.
Go.
There was a young girl just a bit further down in the cabin, but she was really disorientated. I mean, I suppose we all were, really. We just didn't have any idea what was going on. I just brought her down to the slide. She was taken off then. The fireman was telling me to come on, and I was thinking, well, I've not finished, we've not finished yet.
When Toff re-enters the cabin, the thick smoke makes it as hard to see as it is to breathe.
It was really dark and quiet. I'd never seen anything like it. And I could see the light from the door anyway by then, so I knew where the door was.
The smoke forces Toff to abandon her search. Just minutes after pulling off the runway, British Air Tours Flight 28 has been consumed by fire.
We got out of a flight deck which was relatively intact, and when we turned round on the ground, we saw a complete wreck of an aircraft, and it had happened in a matter of seconds. It was dreadful.
54 people are dead. Another would die in hospital.
There was nothing wrong, really, with us. We thought nothing physical wrong with us. But our lives changed, you know, just in those few hours.
I couldn't breathe. I was virtually out the door, and I couldn't breathe then.
The smoke was coming in and everybody just stood up and ran out. It was just a mad panic getting out.
Because when the smoke came, you just couldn't see anything at all. Couldn't see anybody.
It takes 125 firefighters more than 2 hours to put out the fire. News of the disaster soon spreads around the world. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher flies to Manchester to visit the scene.
When we get a terrible air crash of this kind, everyone is appalled and shocked. Every single aspect of this accident will be thoroughly investigated. It has to be.
This is the 4th major commercial air disaster of the year. In June of 1985, an Air India jet exploded over the Atlantic Ocean. 329 people were killed. Weeks later, 137 people died when a Delta Airlines flight crashed at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And just 10 days before the Manchester crash, the deadliest single aircraft accident in history. Japan Airlines Flight 123, a fully loaded 747, slammed into a mountain, killing 520 people. British Air Tours Flight 28 adds 55 new victims to the list of casualties. 1985 is now the deadliest year in the history of commercial aviation. The flying public is getting nervous. Britain's Air Accidents Investigation Branch sends a team to Manchester to unravel the events that led to the catastrophe. Among them, Stephen Moss. He'll be inspecting the plane's engines.
This should not really have happened. The aircraft didn't even get airborne. It didn't run off the runway, and yet still 55 people were killed.
Chris Prothero is also on the team. His focus is on the fire.
We were aware from initial reports that the fire had entered the aircraft very rapidly as the aircraft came to a halt, and that was a focus for me.
It doesn't take too long for Stephen Moss to figure out where the trouble started. He sees damage to the plane that was not caused by fire.
Well, the first thing we noticed clearly was the hole in the underside of the wing. And right next to it was a gaping hole in the side of the engine. It seems that one had led to the other.
To get a plane loaded with passengers off the ground, you need to generate massive thrust. That power is created when air travels through the front of the engine to a series of compressor fans. It's then ignited, and the exhaust pushes the plane forward. Something had clearly gone very wrong with Flight 28's left engine. Investigators look for clues on the runway and in the cabin, hoping to discover why so many people died.
Entering the cabin for the first time, there was as with all aircraft fires, there's an overwhelming and pungent smell. Burning plastic, burnt fuel, burning material had dropped down onto seats, and so the aisles were filled up with the remains of overhead lockers. A scene of devastation.
The damage in the cabin is revealing. It's almost completely charred up high, but is relatively intact down low.
It was clear that there had not been flashover in this particular case.
A flashover occurs when the gases in an enclosed space become so hot that they ignite, incinerating everything around them. The way Flight 28's cabin is charred tells Prothero about the nature of the fire.
Many of the seats squab, cushions, even things like the emergency evacuation cards, which are just plastic laminated cards, were pretty much undamaged. You could have wiped them off and put them on another aircraft and nobody would have known they'd been in this accident, whereas at the upper levels in the fuselage, there was a great deal of heat damage, and this is not a characteristic of a flashover.
The fire in the cabin had been severe, but should not have been catastrophic. This leaves investigators with two questions. Why did so many people die? And what caused the fire? The answer to the second question may be outside the plane, lying on the runway. Investigators find a large piece of dome-shaped metal along the plane's path. Stephen Moss can see it's from a piece of the engine called a combustor can.
It looks like there'd been a separation of the can from the front end from the back end.
The combustion chamber of the 737's jet engines contains 9 combustor cans. It's where fuel and air are mixed and ignited, so each can needs to withstand intense heat. Moss suspects the fractured can somehow blew apart and destroyed the plane's left engine.
It had struck an underwing fuel tank access panel and put a sizable hole in that, which directly led to the release of a vast quantity of fuel.
Proving the piece of the combustion can penetrated the wing is easy. It fits neatly into the hole in the wing.
This was clearly, if you like, the root cause of the accident.
The engine on the plane is a Pratt & Whitney JT-8D. For Moss, that's of grave concern.
At the time, was probably the most widely used jet engine on commercial air transport in the world. And it was obviously pretty urgent that we try and find the cause of this one in order to prevent other aircraft having the same problem.
There are tens of thousands of combustor cans in service around the world. One of them erupted in Manchester. Stephen Moss needs to find out why it failed. And fast. Investigators looking into the deadly fire on board British Air Tours Flight 28 study the plane's maintenance log. They discover the combustor can that ruptured had previously been repaired.
We needed to look at that repair and how effective it was.
During a routine inspection a year and a half earlier, mechanics had found small cracks in some of the combustor cans.
It was certainly not uncommon to find fatigue cracks in the cans. They're operating in a high temperature environment. The manuals give various schemes for repairing these cracks.
Investigators find mechanics repaired the cracks according to a procedure laid out in the engine repair manual. They welded them closed. But the crack on can number 9 was unusually long.
The overhaul manual did not give any limit on the length of crack that could be repaired, and it was a longer crack than had been experienced before. It was still repaired.
After the repaired cans were put back in the engine, mechanics had no way of knowing the weld didn't effectively seal the crack. That's because the cans can't be inspected while the engine is on the plane. Since the repair, there were 11 reports of slow acceleration from the engine that exploded in Manchester. A damaged combustor can could have been a reason for the problem. But troubleshooting guides available to mechanics in Manchester didn't list that as a potential cause. Instead, Pratt & Whitney offered other ways to fix the acceleration problem.
It didn't seem to ring any great alarm bells with them, if you like. They'd seen it before, and it had never turned out to be anything serious.
So mechanics in Manchester made minor adjustments to fix the plane's idle speed and kept the plane in operation. Cockpit voice recordings revealed that the crew of Flight 28 was aware there was a problem with slow acceleration.
Slow acceleration on number 1 engine day before yesterday.
I was on the flight, yes, sir.
Engineers signed off on it.
But the log entry led Captain Terrington to believe that the problem had been fixed.
A comment in the TET log for the flight before the last one, that the engine was slow in accelerating. It wasn't apparent as a serious problem because the engineers had done some work and the aircraft had been flying the previous day with no problems.
The idle speed adjustments didn't fix the real problem, the cracked combustor can. And it reached the breaking point on Flight 28.
Stopping. 28 Mike, we are abandoning takeoff.
Evacuate! Evacuate! Please stay calm and don't panic.
If the airline had inspected the cans, I think there is no doubt that they would have seen the problem.
Investigators now know the origins of the Manchester disaster. The welded crack in combustor can number 9 gave way as Flight 28 sped down the runway. The front of the can was ejected from the engine and put a hole in the underside of the left wing. That led to a huge fuel leak onto the damaged engine, which caused the fire. Engine fires are not uncommon. The body of a 737 is insulated with fire-retardant material to protect the cabin. Investigators still don't understand how a fire outside the plane spread into the cabin as quickly as it did. Fire Inspector Chris Prothero finds part of the answer from viewing photographs of the plane as it sped down the runway.
It was clear from these photographs that there was a very dynamic phase to the fire whilst the aircraft was at speed on the runway, which produced this energetic, turbulent, sort of blowtorching type of fire, visually anyway, trailing behind the aircraft.
A press photo from the day of the crash leads Prothero to a new theory.
The photographs of the aircraft that appeared in the press showed the left thrust reverser deployed. The general impression that one got visually from that photograph was that the thrust reversers had effectively blowtorched fire against the side of the fuselage, and that, if you like, was the explanation as to why the fire had penetrated so quickly. That photograph and the implications of it actually therefore loomed quite large.
Stop!
There are several ways to bring a speeding jetliner to a halt. One is with the brakes.
Don't hammer the brakes.
Another is with the engine's thrust reversers. Thrust reversers redirect the exhaust from the jet engine forwards. This helps slow the plane down.
It looked as though the thrust reversers had simply blown this big fire on the left of the aircraft directly onto the side of the aircraft, directly onto the rear fuselage.
That would explain why the fire destroyed the cabin so quickly. It now seems possible that Captain Terrington made the fire worse by trying to slow his plane down. But Prothero has two good reasons to doubt his theory. One is the location where charring from the burning exhaust gas, or efflux, was found.
The efflux impinges on the fuselage further up, closer to the roof, the crown skins of the aircraft. So actually, the penetration that we had low down did not fit with that.
And the other reason is, by the time the thrust reversers were deployed, the left engine had already exploded. But to act as a blowtorch, the engine would have needed considerable exhaust.
We did calculations to confirm that the residual thrust from that engine would not have had the energy to have this effect. That confirmed that the thrust reversers couldn't actually have played any role, or significant role anyway, in the fire's severity.
Clearly, something other than the thrusters had caused the fire to spread so quickly. Prothero looks more closely at the data. After examining weather reports from the day of the accident, he finds the answer.
The wind was the main factor that determined the severity of the fire in terms of its attack on the outside of the aircraft, how rapidly it penetrated the aircraft, and it also affected the conditions inside the cabin.
Believing he had blown a tire, Captain Terrington made a fateful decision.
Stop it. 28 Mike, we are abandoning takeoff.
Well, when we heard the thud and we closed the throttles, it was my assumption that we were going to turn off the runway, clear the runway, ask air traffic for an engineer to come out and check the tyres.
Like a highway, an airport runway has a series of exits. Captain Terrington chose one called Link Delta.
But we've got a fire on number 1.
When we got the additional information of a fire warning, the brain was already programmed to carry out the stop.
The crew had been aware that they had a fire, but didn't really appreciate at the time the nature of the fire, the severity of the fire, so they had turned off the runway.
Captain Terrington turned his plane to the right and brought it to a stop. He couldn't have realized that doing so would make the problem far worse.
There was a crosswind, a slight crosswind, from the left side of the aircraft that was carrying the fire that was burning from the fuel that was pulled underneath the left wing. It carried that fire aft, rearwards, and took over and under the rear fuselage, in between the wing and the tailplane.
The wind wrapped the fire around the back of the plane and into the cabin.
If there'd been no wind at all, I think the situation would have been very much more benign.
Investigators have discovered how the fire started and the conditions that caused it to penetrate the cabin. Now, investigator Ed Trimble must solve the biggest mystery surrounding the Manchester accident.
Here we had an aircraft which had aborted the takeoff for good reason. It had taxied off and stopped in a taxiway in an expeditious manner, and yet 55 people had lost their lives. So there was a big question as to precisely why that had occurred.
Investigators learned that most of the dead were not found in the worst burned parts of the plane. Autopsies will point to the real killer on Flight 28. Of the 54 people who died in the cabin, only 6 had suffered serious burns. All the rest died from smoke inhalation. It seems the smoke in the cabin was particularly lethal. Survivors tell investigators that the smoke was unbearable.
The smoke was really black, and it was almost touching. It was really weird.
And they say the effect of that was shocking. Immediately you took one breath of the smoke, you began to feel debilitated, and you knew that if you took another breath or two, you weren't going to make it.
At the time of the Manchester accident, the effects of fire on an airplane had been well studied and understood, but the effects of smoke were not. To figure out what made the smoke so toxic, Trimble decides to recreate the fire that burned on Flight 28.
We were trying to model not only the gases which were produced, but also the kind of threat levels which were produced.
The smoke that filled the plane was from materials burning inside the cabin. The foam in the seats, the wool in the carpets, and the plastic overhead bins all release poisonous fumes. Those conditions are recreated by burning those same materials. Trimble discovers the passengers on Flight 28 inhaled smoke that contained a deadly blend of poisonous gases, including high levels of carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide. Now he desperately needs to find out if there's any way to protect airline passengers from that kind of smoke.
So it seemed to me pretty clear that unless we could protect people's respiratory systems from the assault from such combustion gases, there was little that we could do to improve survival chances from aircraft fires.
Over the course of 5 weeks, investigators run dozens of tests, experimenting with different filters. They burn nearly a quarter ton of material to create the necessary smoke. Their dramatic conclusion: it may have been possible to save passengers' lives.
There was not the slightest doubt in my mind that in these situations, in an aircraft cabin, if it is being assaulted by combustion gases, your chances of survival are vastly improved if you have smoke hood protection.
British Air Tours Flight 28 had only enough smoke hoods for the crew. They were never used. Trimble's research indicates that smoke hoods for passengers could have saved lives.
There were hoods available, both of the filter type and the breathable gas type, which can provide a very high level of protection to people in these circumstances.
Many of the passengers on Flight 28 would have survived with a few more minutes of breathing time.
It was in a blink of an eye, you know, from the time, you know, we stopped on the runway, you know, just within a few minutes, you know, it was all over, really.
A full Boeing 737 is designed to be evacuated in less than 2 minutes. So even without additional time, more of the passengers on Flight 28 should have been able to get off. To discover why so many people never made it off the plane, investigators turned to an unlikely source for the answer. By law, airplane manufacturers must prove their planes can be evacuated quickly and safely. When the 737 was introduced in the UK, Boeing demonstrated that 130 people could get off the plane in just 75 seconds.
All public transport aircraft are certificated to the same criteria, and that is that the total complement of passengers must be capable of evacuating from the aircraft using half the exits in the aircraft, it's generally one side or the other, within a maximum of 90 seconds.
But 90 seconds after Flight 28 came to a stop, most of the passengers were still on board.
The reason why the evacuation in Manchester wasn't achieved in 90 seconds is because the conditions in a real fire evacuation are completely different from the certification conditions.
The certification evacuation is conducted in clear conditions, with no smoke that reduces vision and overwhelms passengers. Within minutes of coming to a stop, Flight 28 filled with thick black smoke.
As soon as the smoke began to spill into the rear cabin and then flow forwards, essentially that induced immediate panic in those who were so affected by the smoke, because their respiration, I mean, the typical comment was, I took one breath of smoke and I felt as though my lungs were solidified. You can imagine under these conditions that people have got to get away from the smoke. And the people did this by basically clambering over the seats and other people in front of them.
In less than 5 minutes, what should have been a survivable accident turned deadly. To prevent future tragedies, Britain's Civil Aviation Authority decides to learn more about people. Helen Muir is a psychologist and a leading expert on how airplane design can influence survival. She's asked to study the behavior of passengers on Flight 28 to figure out why so many died.
What we had to learn to do was to design the aircraft interior so even if we had what we might say was dysfunctional behaviour in totality, we could accommodate the needs of individuals and their desperate rush to get out.
Muir configures a cabin to duplicate Flight 28 and fills it with volunteers. Then, to have them act as though the plane's on fire, she offers money to the first ones off.
And that produced behaviour that was quite unbelievable. People went over seats, they went round, past each other, all sorts of things. And indeed, when survivors from the actual Manchester accident came and saw the videos, they said, yeah, that's how it was.
The evacuation of Flight 28 was slowed by the fact that passengers became jammed in the bulkhead opening separating the main cabin from the galley. Investigators discover the logjam was created by the design of the Boeing 737. The bulkhead opening was 22.5 inches wide, just enough for one person to fit through.
But what they wanted to know was how much wider would they have to make it for people not to get stopped and blocked. We were trying to do as much as we could to recreate the situation which had happened at Manchester and then to systematically vary the aircraft interior to see what changes would improve the situation for passengers.
Muir's tests showed the narrow bulkhead opening created bottlenecks that flight attendants had to constantly clear. Increasing the width to 30 inches greatly improved the movement of passengers.
But we showed through repeat testing that if you changed the minimum gap from 20 to 30 inches, you would dramatically improve the speed at which people could get out and you'd reduce the likelihood of people falling and slipping and so on.
As a result of Helen Muir's work, a recommendation was made to increase the space between the bulkhead walls to 30 inches and introduce strip lighting to help guide passengers to exits even when they are blinded by smoke. Muir also found a way to improve cabin safety without redesigning the cabin.
Please sit down.
She conducted research on the behavior of the cabin crew in emergencies and found that passengers get off a plane much faster with a highly assertive crew.
It's because we don't want people really making their own decisions. We want people to do exactly what the cabin crew or the procedures state, and we don't want people hesitating, particularly at the door.
Helen Muir's research prompted manufacturers to redesign cabins to make them safer. But one safety feature remains controversial: smoke hoods. Ed Trimble believes they should be mandatory on all commercial flights.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Helen Muir is less convinced. She's studied how smoke hoods affect passenger behavior and is worried they would slow down the orderly evacuation of an airplane.
We know you've only got literally 1.5 to 2 minutes for everybody to get out. What we don't want to have is something which is difficult to put on, so it slows people getting down.
The most important lesson of British Air Tour's Flight 28 is that seconds matter. It's now universally accepted that it takes 90 seconds from the first sign of fire before it becomes unsurvivable. The passengers on Flight 28 lost valuable time when the starboard side door jammed. The investigators determined that the slide mechanism deployed too early, preventing the door from opening. There was a flaw that led the slide container's lid to jam if the door is opened too quickly. After the Manchester accident, Boeing quickly redesigned the system so that couldn't happen. But the recommendations made by the AAIB weren't adopted quickly enough to save lives 6 years later. In 1991, a Boeing 737 slammed into another plane on the runway in Los Angeles and caught fire. Many of the 22 people who died were overcome by smoke before they could get out. But in 2005, the crash of an Air France jet in Toronto showed how much has changed since the Manchester accident. All 309 people got off that plane in just 90 seconds. No one died. Some major changes to commercial airliners
All right, the door's open.
came about because of a flight that never left the ground.
That's the only way I can resolve it, with the death of 55 of my passengers. The fact that flying is now safer.
I can't imagine anybody, you know, doesn't wish that it hadn't happened. You know, despite what's been learned and despite maybe the subsequent lives that have been changed, you know, you'd give anything for it not to have happened.
January 2008. The Boeing 777 is the gold standard for commercial aviation. For more than 10 years, the plane has logged 2 million flights without a single major accident.
Clear to land.
But less than 1,000 feet above London's Heathrow Airport, all that changed.
Hey, I can't get power on the engines.
What do you mean?
It's not giving me power.
This can't be happening. I thought if I don't do anything, then everybody will die.
Mayday! Mayday! Speedbird! Speedbird!
Whatever brought down one of the world's most technologically advanced airplanes can't be found at the crash site.
And they had the pilots, they had the passengers, they had the aircraft, they had everything there, except the thing that caused it. That had disappeared, as if by magic.
Mayday! Mayday!
British Airways Flight 38, a 10.5-hour journey from Beijing to London. Captain Peter Burkill has made this trip many times before.
I was operating that route a lot. It was one of my favourite flights because it was daylight. You could see the views the whole way along the route.
Burkill and First Officer John Coward both have thousands of hours flying the 777 under their belts.
It's a joy to fly. She handles really well. She's got modern equipment. The computers are easy to use. She's got the range, the ability to do short haul as efficiently as long haul.
For these two, as for many pilots, a day on the job consists of sitting in the cockpit for long hours as computers fly the plane. Powered by 2 massive Rolls-Royce engines, the Boeing 777 is one of the safest planes in the industry. Nick Harris is flying back to London after a business trip to China.
The good thing was it seemed to be that we were coming in early into Heathrow. I was looking forward to getting home to see the family.
Flight 38's destination is Heathrow Airport, one of the busiest international airports in the world. Nestled in the southwest corner of London, it's bordered by the A30 motorway. People who live in the nearby neighborhood of Hounslow are well accustomed to the sound of jets taking off and landing. The area's tightly packed houses come into distant view for British Airways Flight 38. The autopilot is in control as the crew lines up with runway 27 left. As it nears the ground, the plane is buffeted by some high winds.
Just a little turbulence.
It's the first wrinkle in an otherwise smooth journey.
That's not me, that's the auto throttles doing their thing.
We were picking up wind gusts of about 20 to 30 knots, and we were fully aware that the auto throttles would be able to cope with that, so they'd be moving up and down quite a lot.
You might want to keep the autopilot on a little longer than usual, to let the wind calm down. Will do.
In turbulent weather, the autopilot can make faster adjustments to keep a plane level than the pilots. 1,200 feet above ground.
I'll have to turn that off for now, sir.
Sure.
Thank you.
2 minutes before landing, Coward takes over flying the plane.
You have control?
Just as the two pilots had planned.
I have control.
I had a few seconds to spare before clearance to landing, and I was just tidying up my map charts.
Speedbird 38, prepare to land 27 left.
Cleared to land 27 left, Speedbird 38.
I remember looking out to see if our gate was available.
500 feet. 500 feet.
Stable?
Well, sort of.
Suddenly, there's a problem.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines. It's not giving me power. What's going on?
What do you mean?
I was looking at the engine instruments, and they didn't make sense to me because we were asking for full power, but the engine instruments were not giving us any power at all.
What's going on?
What? Flight 38 is crippled in the worst way imaginable.
Well, it looks like we have double engine failure.
With neither engine providing enough power, the jet won't make it to the airport. With 152 people on board, Flight 38 is falling toward London with only seconds until it hits the ground.
This can't be happening. This is one of the most modern jets in the world.
In the cabin, there's no indication that anything's gone wrong.
On approach to land, everybody seemed relaxed in the cabin. We were just looking forward to landing.
Airspeed low, airspeed low, airspeed
low.
And now I was looking at our impact point. I could see a set of buildings around the Hatton Cross area and a petrol station. I just knew if we were hitting those, then it was certain 100% fatalities. At that point, I felt the weight of my 4 bars on my shoulder. I am the captain. If I don't do anything, then everybody will die.
This close to the ground, Burkill doesn't have many options. He could take back control of the plane from Coward, but doesn't think that's the right move.
First decision really was to not take control. I remember looking over at John. He was still flying the plane well. Good, he's doing a good job. He's doing what I need him to do.
Burkill knows that even if they manage to clear Hounslow, the jet could still smash into the busy A30 motorway or the antennas at the edge of the airport.
I thought about raising the gear. That's the biggest drag on a commercial jet. But I needed the gear to crash on. We were going to impact, and that was going to take the brunt of the impact, so I had to leave the gear down.
With a crash imminent, Burkill has only one move left, but it comes with enormous risk.
I knew I had about 15 seconds to make a huge decision. I needed to get past those buildings. It was obvious to me that I needed to raise the flaps.
Retracting the flaps will reduce drag, but also lift. The plane will fly further, but drop faster. Burkill must determine which is more important.
I wanted to discuss it with the crew, but this was all in a matter of seconds. I remember holding that lever for a fraction of a second.
He hopes this move will help his plane avoid catastrophe.
The effect was immediate.
Now Burkill makes the announcement every pilot dreads.
Mayday! Mayday! Speedbird! Speedbird!
It was hard, very hard. I remember the couple of impacts and the noise.
Good God!
The landing was hard. Just a huge bang. The noise, bits falling off the ceiling.
Then I also became a passenger because we were now in an uncontrolled aeroplane. We were sliding along the ground and I didn't know what we were going to hit next. And then I thought about my wife and kids and I said goodbye to them.
The lights went out.
I could hear the wreckage breaking up. And then we stopped. When we actually stopped, I was surprised that I was still there. And then I looked round the flight deck and I was more surprised to see that all three of us were unscarred.
Everybody stay seated with your seatbelts fastened!
And I quickly became the captain again.
The crew switches off the fuel,
APU fire switch.
hydraulic and electrical systems.
Control switches, come. Checklist complete.
I then had to look after my survivors. I thought 20% were dead because this aircraft was broken up.
This is an emergency. Evacuate! Evacuate!
The air stewardess then took control completely. As she opened the door, I smelt the fuel.
We should hurry.
And realized that we need to get off this aircraft.
The big danger now is fire. Having survived the landing, passengers could be killed if flames sweep through the jet.
Jump! Jump!
I left all my luggage and just got myself down the slide.
Jump!
Let's get out of here.
I went through the galley and checked the right-hand aisle, and I was surprised to see nobody there.
Despite Burkill's fears, there are no casualties. Outside in the cool January air, the scale of the disaster is clear.
The right wheel had actually been ripped off during the impact. The engines were just sad. They were all ripped apart. The cowlings were ripped off and the engines were half buried. It wasn't an aircraft anymore.
I now start to realize that we've been involved in a major accident. I saw the damage to the undercarriage and to the wing.
The plane narrowly missed the A-30 and the antennas at the foot of the runway.
It could have been total devastation. If the impact had been on anything other than soft mud and grass, the likelihood of a fire was immense.
Given the amount of damage, it's incredible that only 47 people were injured.
I felt quite lucky that I was still alive. It was quite a surreal feeling.
From China, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown praises Burkill and the crew.
I think it's right to pay tribute to the calmness and professionalism of the British Airways staff, the captain, Peter Burkill, for what he achieved in engineering a landing that protected lives.
Investigators have some early hunches about what caused the engines to fail. They also have plenty of clues, but a key piece of evidence is already missing.
Heathrow's emergency planning swung into action.
The crash of British Airways Flight 38 dominates the news. It's the most serious accident at Heathrow in 30 years.
Heathrow Airport is a very busy airport. It is the main airport in the UK, so anything that happens in
Heathrow Airport immediately hits the media.
More significantly, the 777 is one of the world's most modern and reliable jets. The accident unsettles the airline industry.
The 777 is as safe as an airplane can be. It had such a superb safety record. What on earth happened? You don't like not knowing whether it might happen to the rest of your fleet.
Investigators quickly arrive on the scene. Phil Slight is the lead engineer for Britain's AAIB, the Air Accidents Investigation Branch.
When you first approach an accident site like this, the first thought you've got is, where do I start? The plane landed about 1,000 feet short of the runway. The landing gears pushed up through the wings. The nose landing gear collapsed.
Just hours after the crash, investigators interview the crew. Captain Peter Burkill has a first-hand account of what happened.
I think I wanted to talk about it because I knew of the innocence of the whole crew.
This isn't our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. But the engines weren't giving us any more power.
Well, it looks like we have double engine failure.
We tried to give them more power manually, but there was nothing.
Burkill explains that something had caused both of the jet's Rolls-Royce engines to roll back at the same time, robbing the aircraft of power.
Acceleration on both.
When you hear something of a double engine failure, you start looking at what's common. What could cause both engines to fail at the same time? So our first thoughts were that it may have run out of fuel.
A fuel shortage is rare, but it has happened before. In 1983, a Boeing 767 ran out of fuel flying over central Canada. A mistake in converting between metric and imperial measurements left the plane with much less fuel than the crew thought. At 26,000 feet, they lost power to both engines. The captain was able to glide the plane to a safe landing at an abandoned airbase. In the case of Flight 38, this theory is immediately questioned.
Jet fuel has a certain odor. Anyone who has worked with an aircraft will know the distinctive smell of Jet A1 fuel. There was certainly a lot of fuel leaking from the aircraft, from the ruptures to the bottom of the engines when we arrived on site.
A check of the plane's dipsticks confirms 2 of the tanks did in fact have fuel.
So we knew that there was plenty of fuel on board this aircraft to complete the flight.
There remain several other possible explanations for such a loss of power, and investigators must tackle them all. There is great confidence that the mystery can be solved, as any and every piece of evidence investigators could ever want is readily available. They have access to the pilot, the crew, and most importantly, the entire plane.
We were quite fortunate to have the amount of data that we had on this aircraft. Because the aircraft remained intact, we were able to interrogate lots of computers and also get lots of data from the recorders. Additionally, we had data external to the aircraft, such as radar data, and also the radio transmissions as well.
Mark Ford retrieves the plane's flight data recorders, which promise to give investigators important clues. He has another resource, the QAR, or Quick Access Recorder. While the black boxes are in the rear of the plane, the QAR is a data recorder in the front, used mainly for diagnostics.
It does have an advantage over the flight recorder, though, in that it has a greater memory capacity and can record additional parameters over and above those available on the flight recorder. You can recover the data from a quick access recorder within a matter of minutes in some cases.
Speed, altitude, control settings, cockpit conversations. In all, the various recorders have preserved 1,400 different pieces of data, which should help the investigators close the case. But when they study the QAR, what they find is chilling.
The quick access recorder data stopped about 45 seconds prior to the accident itself. Initial thoughts were that there was an electrical problem, possibly that had affected not only the QAR, but possibly the engines as well.
The 777 is one of the latest advances to computer-assisted airplanes. Pilots don't directly control the plane. Instead, their inputs are sent to a computer. Those signals are then relayed to the engines, flaps, and other systems on the aircraft.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines.
A massive failure of the plane's information systems could explain why the engine stopped working. Perhaps the computers that control them froze. Farnborough is home to the AAIB. The flight data recorder has been sent here for analysis. An electrical problem would be recorded on this device. But interpreting the information will take some time. Time investigators don't have. There are hundreds of 777s landing every day. They need to find answers before whatever brought down Flight 38 strikes again. While they wait, authorities turn their attention to the fuel recovered from the ruined plane. A bad batch of fuel could have deprived the aircraft of power just when it needed it most.
Well, fuel can be contaminated in many different ways. It can be particle contamination, it can be biological contamination, and they can get into filters to restrict the flow.
We took several samples from various points within the fuel system, so not only from the fuel tank itself, but also from remnants within fuel lines and also within various fuel components.
We managed to trace the fuel back through the documentation to a shipment of Jet A1, which came from South Korea. And that was shipped across in a tanker to China and was then transported by pipeline to Beijing Airport. We compared it with over 1,200 other batches of fuel in the UK, and it came out to be very good.
Investigators next consider the possibility of a blockage in the fuel tanks. They discover some bizarre evidence. Several small pieces of tape are recovered, along with something else.
When we were in the fuel tanks, we did find a few small articles. One of them was a red scraper.
The items were likely left over from when the plane was built 7 years ago. But while they're peculiar, there's no indication that any of them played a role in bringing down the plane.
Obviously, it's not ideal to find anything within a fuel tank. We obviously looked to see whether this would have had an effect on the fuel flow to the engines. The items were so small, they would not have caused a restriction.
As the search for answers continues, a puzzling find surfaces. Less than 3 years before the Heathrow crash, another 777 suffered a serious mid-air problem. After taking off in Perth, Australia, a Malaysian passenger jet was climbing through 38,000 feet when suddenly the plane's autopilot pitched the nose up and climbed steeply. Calamity was only averted when the pilot took manual control of the jet.
They did manage to get it safely back to base. The investigators established that this was a computer problem.
British aviation authorities consider that the electronic brain of one of the world's most reliable jets might be faulty.
The Malaysian Airlines aircraft was really quite an unnerving one. The investigators sort of pulled out the files on it and started looking over it to try and get some clues.
Did we have a problem with the electronic control system causing the engines to roll back?
If flaws are found with Flight 38's computers, it means 777s around the world could all be disasters in the making. This thought hangs heavily over the industry. When the readout of the plane's flight data recorder is conducted in Farnborough, investigators learn that the crash could have been much worse.
There was very little they could actually have done.
It looks like we have double engine failure.
There was only 30 seconds between when they were fully aware of what was going on.
Airspeed low.
And the accident was inevitable.
Records show that soon after the engines failed, the plane started falling faster than 1,800 feet a minute, a very steep descent. But lack of power was only one factor working against the crew. They had extended their flaps on descent. It helps control the plane at lower speeds by increasing lift, but the extended flaps create drag, which slows the plane down. It takes more power to keep the plane flying with a wider wing.
Airspeed low.
I needed to raise the flaps. I knew that by raising it 1 notch to flap 25 would be the right thing to do. To reduce the drag, that's what I had to do.
Now, what he did here gave them a few extra feet. Had the flaps been left at flaps 30, the aircraft would have struck the ground just before a set of ILS antennas.
The plane then would have slammed into the antennas, sustaining even more damage and increasing the chances of serious injuries. For their efforts, Burkill and his team are considered heroes.
Flying is about teamwork, and we had an outstanding team. The evacuation.
There is no doubt. Without the flight crew's actions, Flight 38's landing would have been a catastrophe.
Now, the recordings
As they continue examining data from the flight data recorders,
continue right until the moment of impact.
investigators are no closer to solving the case.
Analysis of the flight recorder didn't identify any particular fault with the aircraft electrical system that would have resulted in both engines rolling back.
They are at least able to determine why no data was found on the quick access recorder for the last 45 seconds of the flight. It's not an electrical fault as they first feared.
The 45-second delay in the QAR recording was a result of the fact that the QAR doesn't record in real time. It buffers the data and then will record approximately 45 seconds later.
With all the information from the plane's various data recorders now collected, investigators have a precise picture of what happened. The jet was on the proper course as it made its approach to land, when things went horribly wrong.
At 720 feet, the right engine rolled back. 7 seconds later, the left engine rolled back. The autothrottle attempted to command greater thrust.
It's not me, that's the autothrottle.
But the engines didn't respond.
I can't get power on the engines.
While electrical and computer problems are ruled out as causes of the crash, the flight data recorders do point investigators to the likely source of the problem.
The two most significant parameters from the quick access recorder were the fuel metering valves. Both those valves indicated that they had opened to their fully open position.
The plane's computers were calling for as much fuel from the tanks as possible. The valves were fully open, but not nearly enough fuel was reaching the engines. A plane with plenty of fuel and a working computer system still crash-landed, and investigators can't determine why. They focus on the weather on the day of the accident.
It was a very cold air mass over Siberia, so we were aware of the cold conditions, but the flight was expected to be smooth and also quick.
The plane's path took them high over Russia. The outside temperature went as low as -74 degrees centigrade. It's a potentially dangerous temperature if not monitored closely.
In cold air masses, you have to be very aware of the fuel temperatures.
When fuel starts to freeze, it produces wax. As the fuel temperature drops, the wax becomes greater within the fuel itself until it comes to a point where it can no longer flow.
We have a fuel temperature gauge on the flight deck, which is monitored at all times, and I personally look at that every time I do a fuel check, which minimum is once an hour. Basically, you don't want to get it below -34 degrees centigrade.
While they were cold, the temperatures never dipped into the danger zone where the fuel could wax and clog the system. And the fuel temperature increased significantly as the jet approached London.
We were coming through 20,000 feet, and I remember seeing -20 degrees centigrade, so it had already started to warm up.
Another potential cause of the crash is ruled out. Investigators are now running out of possible explanations.
And the expectation from the media and also from aviation experts was that we would have the answer within days.
But there was no comment today about the ongoing investigation.
It very quickly became apparent that that would not be the case.
They had the pilots, they had the passengers, they had the aircraft, they had everything there, except the thing that caused it. That had disappeared, as if by magic.
Despite mountains of data and physical evidence at their disposal, investigators are still unable to say what caused the crash of a British Airways 777 at Heathrow Airport. They turn to a failure of the fuel delivery system as a culprit. To prove it was responsible, they need to pinpoint anything out of the ordinary about Flight 38's journey on January the 17th, 2008.
It's a daily flight operating from Beijing to Heathrow. We wanted to work out what was unique about this flight. Why this flight in particular?
If you've got a very puzzling incident, like the 777 accident at Heathrow, you're going to mine all the data you can.
Just put them over there for now. So we approached many operators to obtain some data of previous flights so that we could then do a comparison.
Flight data is collected from companies around the world.
And we had something like 144,000 flights in all.
But it will take months of work to analyze this enormous volume of information. To study Flight 38's fuel system more closely, huge sections of it are brought to the AAIB hangar and reassembled.
It allowed us to basically just sit there and look at it and to brainstorm and come up with ideas as to what might have caused it.
McDermott and his team consider all possibilities, from design flaws to a malfunction specific to this aircraft. The examination comes up empty.
We carried out an exhaustive and very thorough inspection and testing of the fuel system, and we find nothing wrong.
Frustrated, investigators are at a dead end.
We kept going through this cycle. We kept going back over what we'd done before. Had we missed something? And every time we went back over, we kept coming back to no.
There was no trouble with the plane's computers. It had plenty of fuel. And no problems with the fuel itself. But somehow, when it was most vital,
Mayday!
The engines didn't get the fuel they needed. The AAIB detectives have run out of suspects.
There was no clear explanation. Nothing that you'd seen before.
It's not giving me that.
In any airplane, let alone the 777, could have explained this.
Now they turn away from the clues they have to those they don't.
Phil started coming out of a mantra, which was a quote from Sherlock Holmes.
Whatever is left, however improbable, must be the cause.
Has to be.
In this case, we always kept coming back to what's there, what could have been there that's not there now. And we come back to ice.
Suspicion that the cause of the accident was ice grew stronger and stronger.
But investigators are faced with a nearly impossible task. How can they prove that ice had brought down the plane when the evidence they need would have melted by the time they arrived? 3 months after the crash, Brian McDermott flies to Seattle to work with engineers at Boeing, the company that built the 777. If ice brought down Flight 38, they need to prove how and why.
We took the pipes from the right side of the fuel system, and those pipes and those couplings were used on the test rig at Boeing.
Ice in the fuel lines has long been a concern for jets of all kinds. But decades ago, engineers found an ingenious way to deal with the ice forming in the fuel of passenger jets. The heart of the system is the fuel oil heat exchanger, or FOHE. Cold fuel runs through thin tubes, which are surrounded by the hot oil used to lubricate the engines.
The purpose of a fuel heater is to heat the fuel up to prevent icing of the delicate fuel control system.
The FOHE is designed to prevent exactly the problem investigators suspect crippled Flight 38. But it's also a potential bottleneck in the system.
During the fuel testing, we were looking to establish where we could get a restriction that would restrict the fuel flow to 6,000 pounds per hour. And the only place that we could get such a restriction occurring was on the face of the fuel oil heat exchanger.
Investigators have to prove 3 things. First, that substantial amounts of ice can accumulate inside the fuel pipes. Second, that the ice can suddenly be released. And finally, prove that it can block a device specifically designed to melt it.
We use different methods of controlling the environment around the pipes that range from dry ice to cold fuel and to hot air to simulate the environment around the pipes that the aircraft experienced during the flight.
After each fuel cooling test, investigators look inside the pipes for ice. But they can never get much ice to form, let alone block the fuel lines.
The fuel temperature was minus 30 degrees centigrade. Very little ice would stick to the inside of the fuel pipes.
Investigators know the temperature on the accident flight didn't get much colder. So how had the ice formed?
We still hadn't answered the question of where does the ice come from in the first place? And indeed, was it ice? Or was there something else that we've missed?
Surprisingly, when the fuel temperatures are warmer, the breakthrough arrives.
If you have water in the fuel, then that water will freeze and form ice crystals. And then when the temperature gets to about minus 20 degrees centigrade, then those ice crystals will start to stick together and will also stick to the inside of the pipes.
Below minus 20, any ice crystals in the fuel are too cold to attach to the pipes. But in the sticky range, between minus 20 and minus 8 centigrade, slushy ice forms and sticks to the sides of the fuel pipes.
So when we demonstrated that ice could actually build up and grow onto the walls of the fuel pipes, there was a certain amount of surprise as to how much could actually grow.
And now we're getting somewhere.
Well, the question for us at this stage was, how could that ice come off the pipes?
Investigators think they have the smoking gun.
Right.
But they still can't prove how a small bit of ice could bring down a $200 million plane. They continue analyzing thousands of comparative flights to see what made Flight 38 unique. But after 7 months, they still can't crack the case.
From 35,000 Rolls-Royce powered flights, it was less than 1% that had the same features as the accident flight.
Then, on November the 26th, 2008, more than 10 months after the crash, the importance of finding an answer is underscored when the elusive culprit strikes again. Another 777 runs into trouble 39,000 feet above the United States, when one of its engines simply stops working.
Fortunately, in that case, the engine recovered and the aircraft landed safely at Atlanta.
Even though it didn't result in an accident, it reinforces concerns that there's a potentially dangerous flaw on every 777 around the world. The incident captures the attention of the British Airways crash investigators.
The Delta Shanghai flight really was investigated with huge interest. The engines were Rolls-Royce engines of the same type. So they immediately went looking for evidence of the same problem.
And in fact, they do find important similarities between the Delta airliner and British Airways Flight 38.
The aircraft had operated a long sector from Shanghai in China to Atlanta. The fuel temperatures were within the sticky range that we had defined during the research. We were able to see that the reaction of the engine was very similar to that of the 777 at Heathrow.
Later examination of the Delta flight shows no evidence of any electronic, mechanical, or fuel system problems, strongly suggesting that the culprit was indeed ice.
When we heard about the Delta flight, we were more convinced than ever that we were on the right track.
McDermott and the investigators at Boeing in Seattle continue their testing. It's been a year since the accident, and the problem hasn't been found or fixed. They've run hundreds of simulations and spent millions of dollars. They still can't get the ice in the fuel lines to clog the fuel oil heat exchanger and cause the kind of blockage that brought down Flight 38.
We came to a stage where we had not actually come up with what had caused this accident. At this time, the media and also the general public, there was a bit of unrest as to why we had not yet come up with an answer.
Industry pressure to resolve this case is intensifying. Investigators still need to know what made Flight 38 different from thousands of others that had flown under similar conditions. To find out, they retrace every moment of Flight 38's journey. The voyage from Beijing involved a gradual climb, a steady cruise, and a gradual descent. The fuel temperatures fell and rose accordingly, causing ice to accumulate in the fuel lines. That ice posed no danger unless it was released. Now investigators study the fuel flow and find that it was kept steady for most of the flight. The autopilot maintained constant speed and low power for hours, never demanding an abrupt increase in engine power until just before they reached the runway.
The approach into Heathrow was quite a turbulent approach, and the engines were demanding various levels of thrust power.
It's not me, that's the auto throttles doing their thing.
And there were 4 changes in fuel flow, one of which was a very high fuel flow of around about 12 to 13,000 pounds per hour demanded.
A closer review of the American Delta flight reveals that its engine rolled back under the same circumstances, a sudden demand for power after a long period of consistent speed. Investigators are now set to duplicate these precise conditions. They hope that by reproducing the moments just before landing, which was the only part of the flight where the crew suddenly required more power, they may finally get the answer they're looking for.
The problem that we were looking at is very, very difficult to replicate. And during what was one of the last tests, we actually managed to get all the elements together.
After simulating running engines at constant speed, investigators increased the power.
We allowed the ice to accumulate for 3 hours, and then the flow rate was increased.
What happens next breaks the case wide open. In Boeing's Seattle lab, investigators' sudden demand for more engine power causes the fuel pressure downstream of the fuel oil heat exchanger to drop dramatically. And when investigators examine this vital component,
we then saw that ice had formed across the face of it.
soft ice that had formed deep inside the fuel lines broke free when the pressure was abruptly increased. It restricted the flow of fuel to the engines. Investigators have finally found the Achilles heel hidden deep inside the 777. The tubes that bring the fuel through the FOHE jut out just above the container of hot oil. It's just a few millimeters, but was enough to prevent the ice from coming in contact with the hot surface below and melting.
Now, the ice doesn't totally restrict the fuel flowing through it. It has some porosity, so the fuel will continue to flow through. But the flow rate is much lower than it should be.
In all of the tests, only one gave investigators the result they were looking for, the one that exactly matched the journey of Flight 38. While the plane flew over Russia, water in the fuel turned to ice. At -20, it began to build up along the inside of the pipes. The steady speed of the aircraft ensured this accumulation was never interrupted. Then, as the plane approached Heathrow, turbulence resulted in the first demand for power since much earlier in the flight, and things cascaded into a serious problem.
Doing their thing. You might want to keep the autopilot on a little longer than usual.
The gushing fuel washed the ice through the fuel system until it built up against the face of the FOHE, with disastrous results.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines. It's not giving me power.
Facing a threat no one knew existed,
Mayday! Speedbird!
the pilots didn't have a chance to solve the problem. But why had the American Delta crew been able to clear the blockage, while the British Airways flight ended in near catastrophe? It's discovered that after just a few seconds of reducing engine power to idle, the blockage in the FOHE clears. But this maneuver was not available to the British Airways pilots because they were so close to the ground. Soon after the Seattle tests, Rolls-Royce redesigned the fuel oil heat exchanger.
So what Rolls-Royce did was to actually remove those protruding tubes, so you now have a flush face.
And they found that if they flattened this surface, even if ice crystals did form in the fuel, they'd go straight down the holes in the block. Very, very easy fix.
Other aircraft manufacturers are ordered to ensure that their systems aren't vulnerable to the same problem. Peter Burkill, John Coward, and the rest of the crew of Flight 38 received the British Airways Safety Medal for their performance during the accident. It's the company's highest honor.
Crew have been presented with an unprecedented failure, and they did the best they could in the time that they had available.
The crew did as good a job as they could, and since they really only had about 30 seconds to think about what they were going to do about this, they couldn't have done any better than they did.
The ice that brought down one of the world's most sophisticated airplanes was gone by the time investigators showed up.
Weird thing about this investigation was that the culprit had fled the scene.
The inquiry into what happened consumed thousands of hours of manpower and cost millions of dollars.
These people really pulled out the stops to find out. And the reason? We have to know.
With unrelenting diligence and a little inspiration from Sherlock Holmes, the mystery was finally solved.
Whatever is left, however improbable, must be the cause.